Chapter 2032. Who's the sheep to? You're an eagle. Uncle Long was stunned and reminded him. Although the training of beasts was similar, eagles and phoenixes were not of the same race. This unreliable guy wouldn't train this little phoenix into an eagle, right? That would be fun to watch. I know. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. I'll train it just like how the Phoenix King trained me. Audiobook said seriously. However, after hearing this, Uncle Dragon's face darkened even more. Looking at Audiobook, Uncle Dragon was speechless. He couldn't help but think to himself, how are these the same? What kind of person was the Phoenix King? Their training must have been arranged according to the characteristics of your eagle clan. But do you know anything about phoenixes? Do you know how phoenixes raise their offspring? Furthermore, although this little phoenix was still young, it was already a 9th-ranked sacred beast. Did it still need to be trained? Who wants you to train? Let go of me, you ugly monster. At this time, Fengzhan also shouted out in a rather uncooperative manner. Seeing the little phoenix's resistance, Uncle Dragon was even more pessimistic about Audiobook. Hehe. Even if you don't want to, you can't. This is what your master said. Audiobook had Lung Ruoxia's support, so he was not afraid of Fengzhan's provocation. Hearing this, Fengzhan became listless. Wu master, be obedient. Otherwise, I'll tell the little girl that you're not going to accept your punishment. Audiobook gave Uncle Long a triumphant look, and then said to Fengzhan. However, Fengzhan was too lazy to even lift his eyes. He didn't want to bother with this fellow who was using his power to intimidate others. What's going on? Hearing Audiobook's words, the question mark on Uncle Long's face grew bigger. Seeing this, Audiobook described what happened to Uncle Long. After Uncle Long heard it, his expression became serious. Old whale, don't worry. We'll find a way. Seeing Uncle Dragon's expression, Audiobook knew what Uncle Dragon was worried about, so he could only comfort him. In fact, he was not confident, but now was definitely not the time to attack the morale. The next morning, after Lung Ruoxia finished her breakfast, she pulled the evildoer along with her and left the inn. This time they swaggered out of the inn. Of course, she did not forget to bring her precious along. However, when the inn's waiter saw Lung Ruoxia, he was stunned because he did not remember such a handsome man coming to stay the night. However, he did not think too much about it, and immediately treated Lung Ruoxia as a friend of the inn's customer. From this, it could be seen that his mental endurance was also unusually strong. However, before Lung Ruoxia and the demon left the room, the waiter kindly reminded them, the management of the imperial city has been quite strict recently, so you must be very careful when you go out and don't cause trouble. Otherwise, the consequences will be unimaginable. Thanks for the reminder. The demon put on a grateful expression and pulled Lung Ruoxia to the streets. When they arrived on the street, the two of them realized that the security in the imperial city was indeed much tighter than it had been a few days ago. There were guards dressed in the uniform of the guards of the Divine Master's estate everywhere on the street. They patrolled the streets and would even stop and interrogate suspicious people when they saw them. The two of them strolled around the streets with mutual understanding. Baby obediently lay on Lung Ruoxia's shoulder, pretending to be weak. At this moment, Lung Ruoxia saw a shop that specialized in selling medicinal herbs, and pulled the evil demon in. The imperial city was quite prosperous. The streets were filled with shops, and all kinds of goods were available. However, even if the shops here did not belong to the Divine Lord's estate, they were closely related to it. The shop they were entering had the sign of the Divine Lord's estate, a red blood lotus. Normally, the blood lotus and the blood cherry blossom were very similar, but if one looked closely, one would discover the differences between the two. The blood lotus was a truly famous flower. It was extremely valuable in the divine realm, and also had a certain medicinal value. However, the blood cherry blossom was a completely poisonous flower that liked to drink blood. Although the two of them were both blood red in color, the blood cherry blossom's red color carried a hint of blood. However, because the blood lotus was the symbol of the God Lord's estate, there was no one in the divine realm who did not recognize the blood lotus. As for the blood cherry blossom, not many people knew about it. After Lung Ruoxia and the demon walked into the shop, the waiter merely blinked and ignored them completely. This kind of disregard might be considered rude to others, but it was exactly what the two of them wanted. The two of them walked towards the shelf without a sound and casually sized up the medicinal herbs on it. However, their divine senses were constantly observing the actions of the waiter in the shop. However, the waiter really did not care about them because he knew that the things he sold here were extraordinarily expensive. Even if it was just an ordinary medicinal herb, the price was twice as expensive as outside. There were very few people who bought it. Lung Ruoxua had also noticed this problem, so she had no intention of buying anything here. At this moment, a few well-dressed people walked in from the outside. However, Lung Ruoxua and the demon's back was facing them. When the waiter saw them, he immediately put on a smile and went up to welcome them. "Your Excellency Exalt Huang, why are you here today?" The waiter asked the man in the lead with a humble smile, his face full of flattery. But in reality he was thinking, how unlucky. This vampire is here again, sigh. He was going to bleed again. Although he was flattering them on the surface, the waiter really hated these people. However, he was just a small waiter, and this shop did not belong to him. Therefore, even though he hated them, he did not have the courage to offend these people from the Divine Master's estate. After all, these people were not the most powerful and terrifying people in the Divine Master's estate. However, his master still couldn't afford to offend him. More importantly, this person had a backer. The entire Imperial City is heavily guarded now, and I'm in charge of this area, so I naturally had to come and take a look. By the way, how's business? Exalt Huang asked with concern. His words were extremely grand, but the waiter knew very well that this person was here for money. The business is all right. My master even said a few days ago that he wanted to thank Exalt Huang for taking care of him. However, master just so happens to not be here right now. The waiter only finished half of his sentence before he raised his head to look at Exalt Huang. However, the meaning behind his words was obvious. Master is not here, you have come for nothing. I can't make the decision. Hee, that's really unfortunate. However, I have a message for your master. The bidding for the exclusive management rights of the Divine Master's residence is about to start again, so tell him to make preparations in advance. Exalt Huang said with a smile. He didn't look like he was going to make things difficult for the waiter, but the waiter's heart sank when he heard this. Wasn't this a blatant threat? The exclusive management rights of the Divine Lord's residence meant that merchants were allowed to operate shops in the Imperial City under the name of the Divine Lord's residence. However, they had to pay the Divine Lord's residence a very high naming right. Similarly, these shops could enjoy the highest discounts in the Imperial City. However, this did not mean that other people were not allowed to operate shops in the Imperial City. However, the shops that were not under the name of the Divine Lord's residence had to pay the highest taxes in the Imperial City. They would have almost no profit. Chapter 2033. Who's the Sheep 3? Even so, it was the dream of many families to own a shop in the Imperial City. They regarded it as an honor, so even if they couldn't make much money here, they still had to provide for these vampires. Many people were willing to do so. The exclusive management rights of the God Lord's manor were limited to 100 years. This year was the last year of the 100 years, so the waiter didn't expect that Exalt Huang would remind him today. It seemed that Exalt Huang was deliberately making things difficult for them, because he didn't get any benefits from them. Although his heart was clear, the waiter still had to put on a smile and said, "Let my master know. Thank you for your reminder, Exalt Huang." Yes. Exalt Huang nodded in satisfaction. Just as he was about to leave, the yellow-clothed girl beside him suddenly shouted, "Big brother! I want that fox." "What fox?" Exalt Huang was a little puzzled. Then, he looked in the direction the girl in yellow was pointing at, and realized that there were outsiders in the shop. However, he didn't take it to heart because these two people weren't very strong. A purple fox with a big furry tail was lying on one of them. Women just like these useless things. Exalt Huang thought to himself, but he still spoke in a commanding tone. "My sister has taken a fancy to your fox. Hand it over." When Lung Ruoxua and the evildoer, who had their backs facing them, heard Exalt Huang's words, they looked at each other speechlessly. They felt rather helpless. Was this considered an unexpected calamity? In fact, if Exalt Huang had not taken the initiative to speak, the two of them had no intention of paying attention to him at all. After eavesdropping on his conversation with the waiter for a while, the two of them had also concluded in their hearts that this fellow was not a good person. Therefore, the two of them had been pretending to pick medicinal herbs without looking back. Who knew that his sister would actually take a fancy to a treasure? Left with no choice, the two of them turned around. Then Lung Ruoxue pretended to be unhappy and said, "The treasure is mine. I won't give it to anyone else." After he finished speaking, he even held the treasure tightly in his arms, as if he was afraid that they would snatch it away, and conveniently ignored the waiter's sympathetic gaze that flashed past them. When Exalt Huang saw the sissy Lung Ruoxue, his eyes brightened. He was so shocked that his heart was beating wildly. Lung Ruoxue's appearance was like a dazzling ray of light that lit up his entire life. He knew that he had been struck by something called love. In an instant, Exalt Huang's gaze towards Lung Ruoxue became more and more passionate. This man had all the beautiful fantasies in his heart. Today he could finally fulfill his wish. He was so excited that his body was trembling. A cold glint flashed in the demonic man's eyes when he saw Exalt Huang being shot by Cupid's arrow. He shot daggers at Exalt Huang, but Exalt Huang, who was currently immersed in the river of love, didn't feel any danger approaching. As for Lung Ruoxue, when she saw Exalt Huang's lustful look, she felt extremely depressed. Could it be that this fellow could tell that she was a girl? However, that was impossible, right? It was impossible for this fellow to have Sun Wukong's fiery eyes. More importantly, she believed in Green Vessel's ability. Aside from that, Exalt Huang's gaze was too fiery, causing Lung Ruoxue to have goosebumps all over. This was the first time she realized that being stared at by a strange man like this could make her go crazy. Yes, Lung Ruoxue was going crazy. In fact, Exalt Huang was quite good-looking. He had thick eyebrows, big eyes, regular facial features, a tall and strong body, and his strength was also not ordinary. He was a divine emperor. Other than his eyes being a little hot, there was nothing too obscene about him. He was even far away from being vulgar. However, she was a man now. He was a genuine man, so she couldn't understand why Exalt Huang was looking at her with such a fiery and passionate gaze. At this moment, Lung Ruoxue would never have thought that Exalt Huang wasn't lustful towards women. He liked men, especially men like her who had the temperament of a submissive. She was Exalt Huang's favorite. "Young master, what is your name?" Exalt Huang, who had finally regained his senses, looked at Lung Ruoxue with deep affection and asked, "Ugh, when did the young master's name become a beautiful name?" Lung Ruoxue's mind was in a mess when she heard Exalt Huang's question. However, she still replied politely, "Mzhou Kuan." She had plagiarized again. She had no choice. When she saw Mr. Huang, she wanted to tell him a slightly more vulgar name. Therefore, she thought of Zhou Kuan immediately. "So it's young Master Zhou. It's an honor. I am Huang Shou. He's a consecrator of the God Lord's estate." Huang Shou took the initiative to introduce himself. At this time, the yellow-clothed woman beside him couldn't wait any longer. She pulled on Huang Shou's lapels and loudly reminded, "Brother, I want that fox. Why are you talking so much nonsense? I'm sorry, the treasure is mine. I won't give it to anyone else." Without waiting for Huang Shou's response, Lung Ruoxue rejected him again. You sissy, it's your honor that I'm interested in your beast pet. Don't be so ungrateful." The yellow-robed lady was enraged after hearing Lung Ruoxue's words. However, Lung Ruoxue wasn't afraid of her at all. She only looked at Huang Shou, waiting to see what he would say. When Huang Shou saw Lung Ruoxue's resentful beautiful eyes, his heart immediately melted into a puddle of water. He quickly promised, "Brother Zhou, don't worry. That fox is yours. No one will be able to take it away from you." "Little brother Zhou." Lung Ruoxue was shocked. This guy was really friendly. In such a short time, she had become a good brother. However, now was not the time to be calculative about this. So she put on a grateful look and said, "I'm relieved to hear that, Exalt Huang." However, even though she was relieved, the yellow-clothed woman was not. The yellow-clothed woman shouted angrily, "Big brother, I'm your sister. How can you help an outsider and not me?" I'll definitely tell the old ancestor that you're a traitor. Don't talk nonsense. When did I betray you? Junior brother Zhou isn't an outsider, so how can you just take his beloved beast? Isn't it just a fox? When I have time, I'll catch one for you. The moment Huang Shou heard his sister's words, he immediately coaxed her. In fact, in his heart, his sister was not as important as Leng Ruoxue. After all, it was not easy to meet a man who could move his heart so much. Therefore, he would definitely not allow his sister to ruin his relationship. Then he'll get a purple fox too. The yellow-clothed woman saw that Huang Shou seemed to be a little angry, so she could only say this unwillingly. No problem. Yes, Huang Shou replied. In his heart, he was thinking that he should send someone to inform the Fox clan leader when he had the time, and ask him to send a purple fox over. This was to prevent his sister from having any ideas about the fox, and making the beauty unhappy. After obtaining her brother's permission, the yellow-robed lady finally stopped. However, her eyes would still drift towards the treasure from time to time. However, she was ignored by Leng Ruoxue, because she was in a dilemma. This yellow beast had said that she was not an outsider. When Leng Ruoxue heard this, she really wanted to ask him, "What am I if not an outsider?" However, after thinking about it, it was better not to ask. Otherwise, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to bear the shocking words this beast said. After settling his younger sister, he saw Leng Ruoxue remaining silent. Huang Shou's heart felt like it was being scratched by a cat. This beautiful woman's silent look really made his heart itch. At this time, he really wanted to hold the beauty in his arms and make out, but he was afraid that he would scare the beauty. After some thought, Huang Shou took the initiative to invite him. "Brother Zhou, you haven't been to the Divine Lord's estate, have you? Why don't I invite you to the Divine Master's estate as a guest?" Huang Shou's face was full of pride after he finished speaking, and he almost raised his tail. Of course, the premise was that he had the words. He firmly believed that Zhou Kuan, who was in front of him, would definitely not be able to refuse his words. After all, who in the divine realm did not want to go to the Divine Lord's residence to broaden their horizons? Unfortunately, not everyone would have such an opportunity. Huang Shou's words stunned Leng Ruoxue. This person wanted to invite her to the Divine Master's estate? What was this? After exchanging glances with the demon, Leng Ruoxue nodded in agreement. After all, it would be a waste not to go. This was an opportunity to enter the Divine Lord's residence openly. Huang Shou had already expected that Leng Ruoxue would not be able to reject him, but when he saw that she had agreed, he let out a long sigh of relief. Only then did he realize that he had been waiting nervously for her reply. Sob. This was too much torture for his heart. Then, to avoid any more trouble, he quickly said to Leng Ruoxue, "Brother Zhou, come with me." "All right." Leng Ruoxue nodded and pulled the demon away with her. However, Huang Shou was obviously not satisfied with the demon as he was just a burden. In order to please Leng Ruoxue, he had no choice but to accept the demon's existence. However, he had been feeling sullen all this while. After they left the pharmacy, the waiters in the pharmacy all watched their backs in disbelief. They couldn't help but think in their hearts that strange things happened every year. But there were especially many today. This was the first time he had seen Huang Shou speak to someone so politely and in such a humble manner. Suddenly, an idea came to his mind. Could it be that Huang Shou has taken a fancy to her? With this in mind, Huang Shou's attitude seemed much more reasonable, because there had always been rumors that he liked men. AI? What a pitiful guy. He had sent a sheep into the tiger's mouth. For a moment, his sympathy for Leng Ruoxue was like the waves of the river, endless. However, if Leng Ruoxue knew what he was thinking, she would definitely ask, "Who is the sheep?" Chapter 2034. Chapter 2034 Chaos 1. Leng Ruoxue had never thought of herself as a sheep. If she was a sheep, she would definitely be a wolf in sheep's clothing. However, she didn't know what the waiter was thinking, so she couldn't refute him. Along the way, Huang Shou kept trying to strike up a conversation with Leng Ruoxue. Unfortunately, Leng Ruoxue ignored him. However, this did not dispel Huang Shou's enthusiasm. Instead, it made him more courageous. Huang Shou looked at Leng Ruoxue, who was ignoring him, and felt depressed. However, He wouldn't cherish something that was easily obtained. Lung Ruoxue was the perfect person for him to get what he couldn't get. Therefore, he treated Lung Ruoxue even more diligently. While the demon's face grew darker and darker, he threw daggers at Huang Shou. But the man only had eyes for the beauty, so he ignored the cold and evil look. However, the frosty qi that was released from the evildoer's body was enough to freeze a radius of 100 miles. It made Lung Ruoxue's heart tremble. Sob. She did not need to ask to know that the evildoer was angry. However, this was none of her business. However, she knew that the consequences would be serious if the demon was angry, so she subconsciously stayed away from the 2 barrels of explosives that could explode at any time. However, in the next second, Lung Ruoxue was held tightly by a pair of strong arms, unable to move. In that instant, Huang Shou exploded. Damn it. Let go of my brother Zhou. Huang Shou roared in jealousy. His eyes were bloodshot with jealousy and hatred, and he couldn't help but curse in his heart. I haven't even hugged this beauty yet. How could he let an outsider have it? That's right, the evildoer was an outsider in his eyes, while Lung Ruoxue was his wife. So, when Huang Shou saw someone hugging his wife, one could imagine how angry he was. However, the evildoer only glanced at him indifferently, and Huang Shou's heart trembled. He swallowed the rest of the words he wanted to say, and forgot to say them. Huang Shou quickly reacted. When he thought about how he had actually been frightened by a weak, ugly person, he felt as if he had eaten a dead fly. Damn it, the other party was merely a god king. What was there to be afraid of? He thought that the demon only had the strength of a divine king. Therefore, when he realized what was going on, his anger multiplied. One should know that a divine king was nothing in the imperial city. Any waiter in any shop could have the strength of a divine king. Therefore, it was a great humiliation for him to be frightened by the demon. At this moment, he wanted to kill the demon. However, this ugly monster was with a beauty, so he couldn't do it now. With that thought in mind, he suddenly changed his attitude and smiled at the evildoer. Then he said apologetically, "I'm sorry, I was a little too excited just now." A man must know when to yield and when to stand tall. So he must not let the beauty see that he had any dissatisfaction with this ugly woman. Huang Shou thought that he had hidden his emotions well. Unfortunately, in the eyes of Lung Ruoxue and the demon, he was like a clown. The 2 of them didn't even take him to heart. After walking for a while, the 2 finally arrived near the tall and magnificent building of the Divine Master's estate. However, Huang Shou did not lead them through the main entrance. Instead, he led them to the back door of the Divine Master's estate after many turns. After entering, Lung Ruoxue looked at the ordinary-looking courtyard in front of her, and was speechless. Who told her that this was the Divine Master's residence? Although they had entered the Divine Master's estate through the back door, there was a wall between this place and the spacious main courtyard of the Divine Master's estate. Even if there was a small door on the wall, there were at least 4 guards standing guard there. There was no way they could stroll around the Divine Master's estate like this. Instantly, Lung Ruoxue felt as if she had been tricked. However, Huang Shou didn't think that he had lied to Lung Ruoxue. He even explained with a smile, "Junior Zhou, this is the courtyard we live in. The main building of the Divine Lord's estate is right next to it. However, it's heavily guarded, so even I can't go there often. As a result, I can only trouble Junior Zhou to stay with me for the time being. As long as there's an opportunity, I'll definitely bring Junior Zhou over to broaden his horizons." Lung Ruoxue didn't deny Huang Shou's promise. Then she smiled charmingly and said, "Exalt Huang is too polite. I'm already very satisfied to be able to pay my respects to the Divine Lord's estate." Lung Ruoxue's understanding made Huang Shou fall in love with her even more, and the beautiful smile she had just shown made Huang Shou feel so happy that he couldn't even find the north. Following that, Huang Shou considerately arranged rooms for Lung Ruoxue and the demon. As they were his guests, they stayed in his courtyard. Naturally, he arranged for Lung Ruoxue's room to be next to his. As for the demon's room, he arranged it to be further away from them. Seeing that his room was so far away from Shui, the demon was furious. "Why isn't my room next to hers?" The demon looked at Lung Ruoxue and questioned Huang Shou in dissatisfaction. He could not bring himself to call her Zhoukuan and Shui. Other than junior brother Zhou's room, there's only one empty room. You're not going to stay there, but do you want junior brother Zhou to stay there? Huang Shou said matter-of-factly. Furthermore, he had treated the evildoer as Lung Ruoxia's lackey. Hence, from the bottom of his heart, he believed that the evildoer would not dare to do such a thing. Unfortunately, he had underestimated the monster. After the demon heard his words, he smiled and said indifferently, "That's a good idea. Let's switch rooms." He couldn't ask for more. It would be strange if he wanted Shui to be too close to Huang Shou. In fact, it was fine if Lung Ruoxia stayed next door to Huang Shou. The demon would never let Lung Ruoxia stay by herself. Unfortunately, he was a man who was protective of his food. Even though he knew it was fine, he didn't want Shui to stay by the side of a man who had bad intentions towards her. Even if he was by her side, he couldn't. He was just this overbearing, and Lung Ruoxia understood that. Hence, she naturally wouldn't object. Seeing that Lung Ruoxia didn't have any objections and even indulged this ugly woman, Huang Shou felt as if he had drunk a jar of old vinegar. No matter how he looked at this demon, he didn't like it. However, he couldn't act up in front of Lung Ruoxia, so as not to leave a bad impression on her. So he was in a dilemma. He hated the evildoer to death, but he couldn't do anything to him. This wasn't an ordinary kind of grievance. After consoling himself for a while, Huang Shou could finally get by in the room. However, he had no intention of being nice to the evildoer in private. So when Lung Ruoxia wasn't paying attention, the two of them would exchange glances with each other. However, Huang Shou would always be defeated. After a few times, the evildoer had become Huang Shou's biggest threat. In addition, Lung Ruoxia and the evildoer were showing their intimacy from time to time, which greatly stimulated Huang Shou. When no one was around, Huang Shou would keep asking why. He couldn't figure it out. Whether it was his appearance, family background, or strength, he was above that ugly woman. However, his younger brother Zhou just had to listen to that ugly woman's words. This fact was a huge blow to him. Chapter 2035. Chapter 2034 Chaos. 2. Fortunately, there were a lot of things to do in the Divine Master's residence for the past 2 days. Hence, he did not have to worry about it for long before he was so busy that his feet did not touch the ground. On the other hand, Lung Ruoxia and the demon were no longer bothered by the third wheel. So they settled down temporarily in the Divine Master's residence. When no one was around, the two of them would stay in the bracelet. When Huang Shou was around, the demon would stay in Lung Ruoxia's room. On a certain day, Huang Shou had just finished his work and had rushed over to see Lung Ruoxia, who knew that the person who opened the door for him was a demon. The moment he saw her, the anger in his heart rose uncontrollably. "Don't you have your own room? What are you doing here all day?" Huang Shou roared in anger. Since this guy was always in his brother Zhou's room, why would he want to exchange rooms with him? Otherwise, every time he returned to his room, he would be able to see how happy his younger brother Zhou was. It was a pity that there was such a third wheel. She was really angry no matter how she thought about it. "I'm happy, all right." After the demon finished speaking, he turned around and entered the room. Huang Shou was stunned, and the anger in his heart burned even more. After he came back to his senses, he quickly followed. Seeing Lung Ruoxia sitting in the small living room drinking tea and eating snacks, Huang Shou felt extremely aggrieved. With a face full of hidden bitterness, he said, "Brother Zhou, how can you be in the same room as a man? This is not good for your reputation." God knew how busy he had been these few days. The Divine Master had gone crazy and called all of them over to interrogate their ancestors. Then he ordered them to pay attention to any suspicious people in the Imperial City. They had no time to rest these few days. He finally had some free time, so he specially came to see his beloved younger brother Zhou, and even met this third wheel, so he felt as wronged as he could. In reality, he did not know that ever since Wuxia and Lung Ruoxia had left for the second time, she had ordered the guards of the God Lord's estate to check on suspicious people. However, for some reason, the guards had all fallen seriously ill in the past few days. The God Lord had no choice but to let the elders and sinecures in the God Lord's estate participate in this matter. Some of them were also in charge of the security of the God Lord's estate. Otherwise, the God Lord's estate would be short-handed. Therefore, Huang Shou had been very busy these few days. He was so busy that he did not dare to think about Leng Ruoxue, because the Divine Master's emotions were very unstable. He did not dare to make a single mistake, or he might lose his life. And under Lord Divine Master's rage, there were already people who suffered. After working for a few days, the Divine Master finally gave them a few hours of break to rest. He did not even think before he came to Leng Ruoxue's place. However, he met his biggest love rival here. This made him feel extremely uncomfortable. Seeing Huang Shou's aggrieved expression and hearing his bitter words, Leng Ruoxue's face was filled with black lines. Then she couldn't help but remind him. Exalt Huang, am also a man. It's precisely because Brother Zhou is a man that we have to be more careful. After all, it's more troublesome for Feiyu to spread rumors between men, and not every family can accept such things. I don't want Brother Zhou to be hurt. Huang Shou's words were said with Leng Ruoxue's best interests at heart, and his eyes that kept throwing charming looks at Leng Ruoxue were filled with endless affection. Thank you for thinking about me, Exalt Huang. I'm so touched. Leng Ruoxue was a little speechless. Then she pretended not to understand and asked with a puzzled look. Exalt Huang, are your eyes cramping? Why do you keep blinking? Leng Ruoxue's words made Huang Shou feel defeated. He was trying to seduce her, okay? It wasn't a cramp. Even though he was furious, he could not bear to vent his anger on Leng Ruoxue. As for that ugly woman, the two of them had fought so many times, both overtly and covertly, but he had never won once. Therefore, before he had absolute confidence, he did not want to provoke that fellow. In fact, even if he were to take the initiative to provoke her now, she might not even bother with him. He was well aware of this. With this thought in mind, Huang Shou stood up immediately and bade Leng Ruoxue goodbye before he turned around and left. Seeing that Huang Shou had left so quickly this time, the demon was a little uncomfortable. Why did he leave so quickly? The demon was somewhat regretful. He had not properly dealt with the yellow beast yet. What? Are you planning to make him stay for dinner? Leng Ruoxue looked at the evildoer speechlessly and asked him back. Then, with a thought, she brought the two of them into the bangle. Seeing that they had returned, the smiling Uncle Long couldn't help but tease them. Why is that little yellow beast so listless? You guys didn't do anything, did you? He and Aojia could see everything that happened in the room with Leng Ruoxue, the demon, and yellow beast through the screen. It's not that I didn't do anything, but I didn't have the chance to do anything. Leng Ruoxue laughed lightly as she teased. That's true. Recently, the God Lord's manor has been giving them a lot of trouble. Uncle Long said sympathetically. This was all Shui-er's doing. On her first day here, she had sent her little beasts out to put some medicine in the well water of the Divine Master's estate. It was obvious that it was not the first time the little beasts had done this. They were all familiar with it, and were very excited. However, out of caution, Leng Ruoxue asked them to return immediately after she had drugged them. Otherwise, who knew what these mischievous little beasts would do? In fact, Uncle Long knew very well that the reason these little beasts worked so hard was because they had been punished by Shui-er for 3 days. They had been holding back their anger for a long time, and they had vented it all on the people of the Divine Master's estate. As a result, those people were in trouble. Although the medicine in the well water might not have much of an effect on the people of the immortal realm, gods were also cultivated by mortals. Therefore, many people were still very concerned about eating, drinking, and sleeping. Even if they did not really need it, they could not completely abandon these habits. Otherwise, Shui-er's idea might not have succeeded. However, Uncle Long was clear that Shui-er was just trying to stand up for you. Although she didn't attack them ruthlessly, those people would probably end up worse. The truth was just as Uncle Long had expected. Although the guards of the Divine Master's estate were not in any life-threatening danger, they had suffered a lot. Not only did they feel an unbearable itch all over their bodies, but they also had diarrhea. Many of them had gone pale and collapsed. In addition, each of them had different symptoms. In addition to itchiness and diarrhea, some of them even had a foul smell. In short, they had all kinds of conditions, but they were not fatal. No matter what detox pill they took, they could not cure the problems in their bodies. For a time, the God Lord's estate was filled with complaints, and it was shrouded in a dark cloud. Unfortunately, no matter how angry they were, they couldn't find the culprit who had caused them to be in this state. This fact made them so depressed that they almost vomited blood. Therefore, in recent days, the sky above the Divine Master's estate would brew a storm at any time. The people of the Divine Master's estate had also tucked their tails between their legs, and were careful not to offend the Divine Master. Chapter 2036. Chapter 2036 Chaos 3. In contrast to their troubles, Lung Ruoxue and the rest led a very carefree life. Not only did they have good food and drinks to serve them, the yellow beasts did not have the chance to disturb her. More importantly, they could see the God Lord's estate in a mess every day. This had become a must-watch program for Uncle Long, the rest, and the beasts. However, even though she had already turned the Divine Master's residence into a mess, Lung Ruoxue was still not happy. Although the secret room was the most suspicious, it had not been confirmed. Even if it was confirmed that it was the place where the fog's main body was stored, she was not very confident that she could obtain the petals of the fog's main body. Whenever she thought of this, Lung Ruoxue would feel a little frustrated. However, she would try her best not to show her emotions in front of Uncle Long. Hence, after hearing Uncle Long's words, Lung Ruoxue smiled evilly and said, "I'm planning to make the Divine Master's estate more chaotic." What? When Uncle Long heard this, he was extremely interested. Audiobook, who was beside him, could not help but perk his ears as he looked at Lung Ruoxue with anticipation. Seeing their expressions, Lung Ruoxue took out a few black balls the size of a baby's fist. These balls were the explosive balls that she had modified, and their power was much stronger than before. However, Uncle Long had never seen such an item before. After all, Lung Ruoxue had only used it a few times. "Girl, what is this?" Seeing that Lung Ruoxue was deliberately keeping him in suspense, Uncle Long could not help but ask directly, "This is an explosive ball." Lung Ruoxue said with a smile, "Exploding balls? Don't tell me this little thing is going to explode?" Audiobook asked in surprise. "Not bad." Lung Ruoxue nodded her head slightly. She could not help but think to herself, "I can't do anything to Wuxia, but can't I deal with the rest of the people in the Divine Master's estate? Little girl, you're not thinking of blowing up the Divine Master's residence, are you?" Uncle Long asked in horror. This girl's idea was crazy. The Divine Master's residence was not that easy to blow up. "I had the same intention," Lung Ruoxue said with a smile. "Girl, the Divine Master's residence is very sturdy and is protected by a defensive formation. It's not that easy to blow it up." Although Audiobook was very much looking forward to Lung Ruoxue's words, he was not very optimistic about her thinking. If the Divine Master's residence was blown up so easily, then wouldn't they become the laughingstock of the divine world? Of course, no one dared to laugh to their faces, but behind their backs, the dignity of the Divine Master's estate would be swept to the ground. After thinking about it, he felt that Shue'er's idea was not bad. Unfortunately, he knew very well that the old whale would never agree to this. This was because this idea was too crazy and dangerous. "It's okay. I didn't expect to blow up the Divine Master's residence, but I can still disgust her," Lung Ruoxue said disapprovingly. In fact, her original intention was to cause trouble for Ripple Mist, who asked her to be in a bad mood. "Girl, I don't agree. It's too dangerous. The God Lord's estate is now more heavily guarded than before. Perhaps Wu Chan's divine sense is also watching the God Lord's estate's movements at all times. If we attack and she finds out, we'll be in a passive position," Uncle Long said worriedly. "Uncle Long, don't worry. I know what I'm doing," Lung Ruoxue promised. However, Uncle Long still looked at her worriedly. In the end, it was Qingju who stepped in and promised that he would not be discovered by Wu Jing. Only then did Uncle Long finally let go of his worries. Actually, Uncle Long was well aware of Qingju's capabilities. However, from his perspective, this was completely different from what he was worried about. Furthermore, he was also afraid that Shue'er would rely too much on Qingju and act recklessly. Hence, he had to let Lung Ruoxue have a sense of crisis. That was why he would occasionally oppose Shui-er's opinions. He hoped that she would be able to face the problems that she was facing. Lung Ruoxue was also very clear about Uncle Long's thoughts. Therefore, whenever there was a problem, she would discuss it with them. If they had a different opinion, she would find a way to persuade them to agree. Therefore, the final result would always be her victory, who asked her to have a demon who supported her unconditionally, and the help of the powerful green vessel. When she thought of this, the way she looked at the evildoer became more and more tender, making the evildoer's heart beat wildly. Uncle Long and Ao Jie coughed a few times when they saw the two of them flirting with each other. Then the two of them said seriously, "Since the girl has already decided, then let's act quickly." Now that the matter had been settled, they were even more anxious than Lung Ruoxue. However, it wasn't too late yet, and it wasn't a good time to do bad things. So Lung Ruoxue could only temporarily find something else for the two anxious old men to do. He asked them to go fishing in the stream under the waterfall in the bracelet, and the fish they caught would naturally be their dinner. Moreover, they were not allowed to use divine power or divine skills. They could only use fishing rods. This time, the two of them had a hard time. The two of them had never fished before, not to mention using a fishing rod. In fact, if the two of them wanted to eat fish, they could have just gone into the river to catch it. However, Shui-er insisted that the two of them use some kind of fishing rod. Looking at the fishing rod that was much thinner than their fingers, the two of them were in a miserable state, but they still walked towards the stream in resignation. There were quite a lot of fish in the stream, but as soon as the two of them got close, all the fish in the stream hid under the grass and refused to come out. The two of them looked at each other speechlessly. Fuck. The fish in the stream were too much of a bully. They had seen it with their own eyes. The moment those fish saw Lung Ruoxue, they would take the initiative to come to her. Now that they were seeing them, the two of them almost vomited blood from anger. However, as depressed as they were, the two still took the initiative to fish in the stream. However, after waiting for a long time, not a single fish took the bait. This fact made the two depressed old men speechless and not know what to say. Even when Lung Ruoxue sent Beastie to call the two of them for dinner, they still did not manage to find anything. When they were eating, both of them were frowning. Seeing this situation, Lung Ruoxue felt a little guilty. In fact, she asked Uncle Dragon and Ao Jie to go fishing just to let them find something to do to pass the time. Who knew that the beast's innate pressure actually scared the fish in the stream away? And Uncle Dragon and Ao Jie couldn't use violence on the fish in the stream, so they didn't find anything. What Lung Ruoxue didn't expect was that not being able to catch a fish would be such a huge blow to the two of them. For a moment, she didn't know how to comfort the two. Lung Ruoxue was a little embarrassed as she said, "Uncle Long, Uncle Ao, the fish in this space are extremely cunning. Therefore, you must not take it to heart. And we don't mind. Old Man Ao and I have decided to go fishing there every day in the future. I don't believe that we really can't catch a single fish." Uncle Long gritted his teeth. He was going to fight with the fish. "You call this not angry?" Hearing Uncle Long's words, Lung Ruoxue's face was filled with black lines. She never thought that her failed fishing attempt would deal such a huge blow to Uncle Long and Ao Jie. Now she was so regretful. Seeing Lung Ruoxue's conflicted expression, the demon smiled at Uncle Long and Ao Jie. "Yes, I support your idea, but there's no time for you to fish now. We have to settle the Divine Master's residence first." "Yes, little brat Yi is right. The God Lord's manor is the most important thing." Uncle Long nodded in agreement. His attention was immediately diverted. Lung Ruoxue heaved a sigh of relief when she saw this. After dinner, the sky was already dark. Furthermore, after dinner, the sky suddenly turned dark. It was a sign that a storm was coming. Lung Ruoxue felt that the heavens were helping them with this sudden change in weather. However, Uncle Long and Ao Jie were a little worried. "Girl, it looks like it's going to rain soon. Is your exploding ball afraid of water?" Uncle Long was very worried. He didn't want to waste his efforts. "Yup. Little girl, why don't we do it another day?" Ao Jie said. "It's fine. Uncle Long, Uncle Ao, don't you worry. Tonight's weather is perfect for us to do bad things." Lung Ruoxue laughed evilly. Seeing how confident she was, Uncle Long and Aojia were not as worried anymore. Then Qingju turned the bangle into a small speck of dust again, and it drifted with the wind in the Divine Master's residence. Every time they arrived at a place, Lung Ruoxue and the rest would continuously throw explosive balls at that place through the light screen. Originally, Lung Ruoxue could have done this alone, but in order to let Uncle Long and Aojia have a sense of participation, they had added the two of them. As for the monster incarnate and the beasts, they were just there along the way. After walking around the Divine Master's residence, they saw that it was already raining heavily. However, such weather was perfect for Lung Ruoxue. Hence, their journey was unimaginably smooth. When they returned to the room Huang Shou had arranged for Lung Ruoxue, Uncle Long and Aojia felt as if they were in a dream. It did not feel real. It's done. Aojia sat in the garden in his bracelet and looked at Uncle Long in a daze. At this moment, there were only the two of them. Lung Ruoxue, the demon, and the other beasties had all returned to their rooms to rest. Yes. Uncle Long nodded his head, pretending to be calm, but in fact, he couldn't calm down at all. Chapter 2037. Venting 1. This was too easy. Uncle Long couldn't stay calm. If he did not know about Qingju's ability to enter a no-man's land, he would have thought that he was dreaming. However, just as the two of them were bewildered, an explosion suddenly sounded in their ears. Uncle Long and Aojia looked at each other and thought to themselves at the same time, the explosion just started? Yes. The great explosion in the Divine Lord's residence had officially begun. Furthermore, Qingju had purposely aimed the light screen at every corner of the Divine Lord's residence, so that Uncle Long and Aojia could watch this exciting scene better. The explosion was also deliberately let in by Qingju for them to hear. In the light curtain, smoke filled the air and soon, the sound of explosions rang out. However, the explosions did not cause much damage to the buildings of the Divine Master's residence. At most, they only caused some cracks. However, the flowers and plants in the Divine Master's residence were greatly damaged. Most of them had become withered flowers and willows, lying lifelessly on the ground. Seeing this, Aojia could not help but say, "Aya, poor little flowers and grass. The place you grew up in is too bad, and now you've become the scapegoat of that old woman, Wu Yan. Will you die if you say one less word?" Hearing Aojia's words, Uncle Long rolled his eyes at Aojia. In fact, he did not feel sorry for those plants at all. Would there be anything good from the plants planted by women? Furthermore, Schwer had also said that those flowers and plants were poisonous. However, the effect of Schwer's explosive ball was quite good. He could already see the God Lord's estate in a mess again. It was even more chaotic than a few days ago. Just as Uncle Long had seen, the entire Divine Lord's estate had fallen into an unprecedented panic. The three supreme gods of the Divine Lord's estate, Xian Yi, Xia Yi, and Huang Wei, had appeared at the scene to direct the somewhat flustered people in the Divine Lord's estate. When the three of them saw the God Lord's estate that had been completely destroyed, they felt a headache coming on. In fact, it wasn't entirely true to say that the appearance was completely different, because the main building of the god's manor was not too seriously damaged. There were only some small cracks in some places. However, the originally magnificent god's manor was now completely black from the explosion. In the dark clouds and heavy rain, it looked even more desolate. Anyone who saw it would know that it had just been destroyed. What made the three of them even more frustrated was that while they were worrying about the construction of the God Lord's estate, explosions continued to ring out one after another. This fact made them extremely depressed. "Your Excellency Xian Yi, you can't do this. We have to think of something. If this continues, the God Lord's estate will be destroyed." Huang Wei looked at Xian Yidao worriedly. In fact, he was more worried about the Divine Master's anger. "Does Your Excellency Huang Wei have any good ideas?" Xian Yi looked at Huang Wei without a change in expression and asked indifferently. At this time, he was expressionless, but in reality, his heart was already in turmoil. This was because he knew that the commotion these few days was caused by that girl. Although these disturbances would cause him to be badly battered, he could not help but admire that girl's courage and reckless actions. She even dared to mess with the people of the Divine Lord's estate and blow up the Divine Lord's estate. What else was there that she didn't dare to do? AI. We can only make a decision after seeing how much damage the God Lord's estate has suffered. When Huang Wei heard Xian Yi's words, he sighed helplessly. What good idea could he have? If he had a way, would he still ask Xian Yi? Yes. Huang Wei's words made Xian Yi and Xia Yi nod their heads at the same time. Then the atmosphere between the three of them became heavy. However, although the three of them didn't say anything, they were all thinking about how to deal with this matter, and how to prevent it from affecting them. However, they also knew that it was absolutely impossible to not take responsibility for such a big matter. It was just a matter of how much responsibility he had. At this moment, a guard came to report the casualties. The three of them were shocked when they heard this. Why are there casualties? After hearing the guard's words, Xian Yi hurriedly asked. As far as he knew, most of those explosive balls were in the corners, so no one should have been injured. When we were searching, an explosive ball happened to explode. Someone couldn't dodge in time, so he was injured by the explosion. The guard explained gloomily. Oh, were they seriously injured? Did you take any healing pills? Xian Yi asked with concern. They've already eaten. However, their injuries haven't fully recovered yet. The guard reported. How did this happen? Xian Yi frowned. There's some substance in those exploding balls that can restrain the healing of wounds, so our healing pills have no effect on those injuries. The guard said honestly. Then what should we do? When Huang Wei heard this, he also started to worry. At this moment he saw a guard supporting Huang Shou as they walked over. When he saw that Huang Shou's face was a bloody mess and his body was covered in wounds, he almost jumped out of his skin in shock. Fuck. The person who had been blown up like a ghost was Huang Shou? If he wasn't very familiar with Huang Shou, he wouldn't have been able to tell that the man who had been blown up into a humanoid shape was Huang Shou. However, this was too tragic. When he saw the grievance in Huang Shou's dim eyes, he really wanted to beat up this idiot. Idiot. Why didn't you hide when you knew there was danger? Why was he still charging forward? Huang Shou was his descendant, and a descendant he liked very much. Therefore, out of his love for Huang Shou, he did not expect Huang Shou to work hard in the Divine Master's estate or enjoy glory. As long as he could keep his life, it would be fine. But now what had this guy done? Looking at the unfriendly eyes of his ancestor, Huang Shou felt wronged. He listened to his ancestor, and hid when he was in danger. Unfortunately, he hid in the wrong place where the exploding ball was thrown. So he was in a tragedy. Old ancestor. Huang Shou had just called out, but he swallowed the words he was about to say under Huang Wei's glare. Wu. He felt that he had been too pitiful recently. That ugly monster bullied him, and now the old ancestor was also blaming him. However, Huang Wei was not in the mood to care about his own junior. Instead, he ordered the guard who was supporting Huang Shou. Why did you bring him here? Hurry up and take the injured back to their rooms to recuperate. In fact, he wanted to send Huang Shou back to recuperate, but he was afraid that it would give others a reason to accuse him, so he had to bring everyone. Yes. Yes, sir. The guard replied. Actually, he felt quite aggrieved because it was Exalt Huang who insisted on coming to see His Excellency Huang Wei. He couldn't just stop him from coming. He couldn't afford to offend her because she had a strong backing. However, it was wrong to come. He really felt that he was unlucky enough. Although he thought so in his heart, he still accepted his fate and helped Huang Shou, who was like a wronged little wife, back to his residence. Chapter 2038. Venting 2. After they left, Xian Yi glanced at Huang Wei disapprovingly, hiding his resentment. Why are you so fierce to Huang Shou? He didn't want to get hurt. It is. I'll definitely report this to the Divine Master, and reward him for his hard work. You should be proud of your descendant's achievement, shouldn't you? Xia Yi also echoed in agreement. Huang Wei didn't have much of an aversion to Xian Yi's words. However, Xia Yi's words made him feel as if he was being mocked. His heart felt uncomfortable, as if it was being pricked by needles. When Xian Yi saw Huang Wei's expression, he knew that this guy was at odds with Xia Yi again. Sigh. These two people. He wasn't young anymore, but why was he still acting like a child? So childish? Cough, cough. After coughing a few times, Xian Yi, who was afraid that the two of them would fight, glanced at Huang Wei and said, Your Excellency Huang Wei, you should come with me to see the situation personally. Your Excellency Xia Yi will stay here and guard the place. After he finished speaking, he did not wait for the two of them to react and pulled Huang Wei away. However, even if he didn't leave in such a hurry, Huang Wei and Xia Yi wouldn't have too much of an opinion about his arrangements. After all, the relationship between the two of them was like fire and water. If they dragged Xian Yi into this and the three of them fell out, even the Divine Lord would have a headache. Therefore, Xian Yi had always been the target of the two of them. Unfortunately, Xian Yi was very slippery. No matter how they tried to please him, he had always maintained his neutral position. Although they were helpless about this, they also felt relieved. The two of them walked around the Divine Lord's estate, their hearts growing heavier. Although the main building of the God Lord's manor was not too damaged, the courtyard was so badly destroyed that it was unsightly. Seeing this, the two of them knew that the Divine Master would definitely be furious. Therefore, they turned around and called Xia Yi. The three of them then went to see the Divine Master, who knew that when Fog Eyes heard their report, she didn't say a word. Instantly, the three of them couldn't quite grasp what the God Lord was thinking. Even if you're angry, shouldn't you at least give a reaction? However, her current appearance made the three of them feel even more uneasy. Could this be the calm before the storm? In fact, how could Wu Xian not know the current situation of the Divine Lord's estate? However, even though she knew, she could not do anything about it. Moreover, when she discovered the abnormality, the God Lord's estate was almost destroyed. Therefore, she had no other way but to be angry. At this moment, although she didn't say a word, her heart was already in turmoil. The flames of anger in her heart had already burned into monstrous flames. However, the more furious she was, the calmer she appeared on the surface. However, her calmness on the surface made Xian Yi and the other two at a loss. Although they were reverent God-level experts and the Divine Master was usually respectful to them, they knew that they were always on the fiery mountain. The Divine Master's temper was unstable, and who knew when he would explode? Now they could feel chills running down their spines just by standing in front of the Divine Master. After a long time, I already know the situation, said Wu Cheng. Comfort the injured and find someone to repair the damaged parts of the Divine Master's estate. I want to see the Divine Master's estate restored to its original state within 3 days. Yes. Yes, the three of them replied. Then they turned around and left. As they left, the three of them let out a long sigh of relief. They had finally passed this stage. The Divine Master would probably not take it out on them. In fact, they were overthinking it. No matter how angry Wu Han was, she would not bear to vent her anger on the Reverent God-level expert. After all, the Reverent God-level expert was the symbol of the Divine Master's estate. If there was no Reverent God-level expert in the Divine Master's estate, she as the Divine Master would be despised by others. Therefore, the Reverent God-level expert was absolutely safe in front of her. However, even though the Reverent God was safe, it didn't mean that she wouldn't vent her anger on others. Thinking of this, the fog immediately disappeared. A white light flashed, and in the next second, Wu Jing appeared in a gray room. As she walked closer, the fog in the room automatically dispersed and the whole room appeared in front of her eyes. It was a prison cell. However, it was not an ordinary prison cell. This was because this prison cell was located in a certain space, and the prisoners locked up here were naturally the most important. There were dozens of stone pillars in this cell, and a person was tied to each stone pillar. There were both men and women, and most of them were unconscious. Their faces were pale, and their clothes were not covering their bodies. They were covered in wounds, old and new, and many of them were old injuries from the years of the formation. The person in charge of this prison cell was a black-clothed man. After seeing Wu Xiao, he quickly came forward and said with a flattering expression, "Master, how come you have time to come over today? I'm here to see if you've been slacking off." Wu Lian glanced at her subordinate and said indifferently, "Master, how could this servant dare to be lazy? This servant has always strictly followed Master's orders. Every day, I torture these people and drain their blood. Oh, be careful and conscientious, and I won't dare to slack off in the slightest," the man in black said with a serious face. He hated that he couldn't take out his heart and liver to show Wu Jing to prove that what he said was true, because if he did, he would have to die. "You're done with today's?" she asked in a soft voice, but her face was expressionless, making the black-clothed man unable to guess what her master meant. "I just finished," the man in black said hurriedly. "Then let's do it again. I want to operate it myself," laughed Ripple Mist coldly. "Yes. I'll prepare the tools for master," the black-clothed man immediately said after hearing Wu Qian's words. The prisoners who had heard their conversation glared at Wu Qian. Unfortunately, they could not speak because Wu Qian did not like to hear their voices. Therefore they were all fed mute medicine. However, even if they could not speak, it could not stop them from expressing their anger. "Yo, staring at me again?" When Wu Yan saw the expressions of those people, she smiled charmingly. "Master, do you want to dig out all their eyes?" the man in black suggested. Although his strength was not high, his methods were too vicious. Otherwise, his master would not have let him manage these important prisoners. Here, he could display his strength. After all, he loved to torture people the most. Especially when no matter how he tortured her, he couldn't kill her. That was why he liked it even more. After all, torturing people was also a kind of realm. He believed that he had reached the peak of this realm, which was also something he was most proud of. "No need. I want to keep their eyes open and let them see how glorious I am. How I will laugh at the entire divine world. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha." Kiran laughed wildly. Seeing these people, her mood improved. However, her arrogant words only made those people's eyes even angrier, while Fog Ripple laughed even more happily when she saw this. Chapter 2039, Venting 3. At this time, the black-clothed man had already prepared the tools for torture. The most common instruments of torture were whips and iron pincers. After the man in black brought the instruments of torture to Wu Qian ordered, "Wake the others up." "Yes." After the black-robed man responded, he immediately fed the unconscious people a pill. That pill was only a primary-level healing pill. It could relieve some of their pain, but it was impossible to completely cure them. And it was by relying on these pills that had little effect that they had to endure the torture of darkness day after day, year after year. Originally, there were more than that number of people. However, over the years, many of them had fallen. They did not even have the chance to reincarnate because these devils would not let go of the souls of their companions. Those people had disappeared from this world forever. When the unconscious people woke up and saw the fog, they had the same expression as those who still had a trace of consciousness, which was anger. He was extremely angry. If they weren't being controlled, they would have swallowed the fog without hesitation. However, when she saw everyone's expression, her mood was surprisingly good. Wu Qian came to a tall and strong man. She reached out her hand and gently touched the man's injured body. But the man did not even look at her. Although the man's injuries were not light, one could still see his handsome figure. However, after suffering for so many years, his appearance now looked like an old man in his 60s or 70s, giving people the feeling that he was a candle in the wind. If it was not for his tall figure, straight posture, and sharp eyes, he would be an old man. Although he didn't even look at Wu Jing, the disdain in his eyes was unconcealed, and the cold air around him became more and more intense. When Ripple Mist saw this, she laughed. "Little Qingyang, do you hate me? I'm so sad." There was a charming smile on Wu Yan's face, but her tone was resentful. However, the man still did not have any reaction and did not look at her. "Do you want to know where your senior brother is? A while ago, he specially came to save you." Kiran was neither angry nor annoyed as she continued to speak with hidden bitterness. These words finally caused the man to have a slight reaction, but that reaction was only faint. However, at this time, the man named Qingyang was already so excited that he could not control himself. "Senior brother. Senior brother is here? How is Xixiang now?" Although Qingyang was very concerned about his senior brother's condition, he knew that he couldn't ask. Once he asked, he would have fallen into this vicious woman's trap. He would be led by the nose by this woman. So, although he was extremely excited, He didn't dare to show any abnormalities or reveal any clues. However, although Qin Yang's reaction wasn't big, Wu Yan was well aware that he was very concerned about that bastard's whereabouts. Qin Yang definitely couldn't hide this from her. Then she continued, Bing Yao is injured. And it's not a light injury. He was poisoned by my flower poison. Do you know what will happen to you? It won't be long before he becomes my most loyal slave. However, compared to him, I still feel more sorry for you. I didn't use any flower poison on you, nor did I make you my slaves. I'm fine. Wu Yan began to take credit. Hearing her words, Qin Yang really wanted to curse. You're good, my ass. He didn't use the flower poison on us because he wanted to torture us and treat us as his mobile blood bank. He knew very well that once they were poisoned by the flower poison, unless they died, it would be impossible for Wu Chen to torture them in this way. Now Wu Chen could do whatever he wanted. Wu Cheng's words made him worry about his senior brother. Although they had suffered all kinds of torture here, they had not lost their nature after all. If their senior brother really became Wu Han's slave as Wu Han had said, they were afraid that their senior brother would be in so much pain that he would wish he were dead. Although he doubted the authenticity of Wu Lian's words, he also knew that Wu Xian had no need to lie to a prisoner like him. Something must have really happened to his senior brother. Thinking of his senior brother, he then thought of his master, and his heart suddenly ached. Seeing Qin Yang, who had always been calm and composed, suddenly show an expression of pain, Ripple Mist was excited. She was still pretending to be unconcerned, but now she couldn't keep pretending anymore. However, she didn't want Qin Yang to continue ignoring her like this. So after taking the whip from the man in black, she directly swung it at Qin Yang. With a paw sound, a deep bloody mark appeared on Qin Yang's body. But at this moment, Qin Yang seemed to not feel any pain as his entire body and mind were immersed in the past. He thought of his master, senior brother, and many other people and beasts. And all the happiness and beauty in the past had been destroyed by this greedy woman in front of him. He hated it. Seeing that Qin Yang was immersed in his own thoughts, Wu Xian whipped him a few more times. In an instant, Qin Yang's body was covered in wounds again, and bright red blood flowed down from the wounds. Wu Xian stretched out her jade-like fingers, touched the fresh blood, and put it into her mouth. The delectable taste of the blood caused her to close her eyes. The continuous pain in his body also woke Qin Yang up. Qin Yang felt like vomiting when he saw the fog sucking his blood, and showing an excited look. This woman was too disgusting. At the same time, Qin Yang really vomited, and this scene caused the anger in Ripple Mist's heart to explode. The whips mercilessly whipped Qin Yang's body and very quickly, Qin Yang was beaten into a pulp. However, he still gritted his teeth and did not even frown because he was already used to such torture. It wasn't until Qin Yang fainted that Wu Xiao unwillingly threw away the whip in her hand. Seeing that Wu Xiao obviously hadn't had enough fun, the black-clothed man handed over a torch in a timely manner. You want me to burn him to death? I can't bear to. Qin Yang's temperament was somewhat similar to US, so she also had a special feeling for Qin Yang. Unfortunately, Qin Yang didn't know what was good for him. He would rather be tortured by her than stay by her side, and become her exclusive property. Therefore, it could be said that she loved and hated Qin Yang. Of course not. Master, Qin Yang has fainted. This subordinate wants you to wake him up. The man in black laughed. He knew that his master had not had enough fun. Therefore, he would naturally do his best to provide the most perfect service to his master. The torch that he handed over was actually one of the many punishments. As long as the torch lit the stone pillar and burned it red, forget about fainting. Even if it was dead, it would be roasted until it woke up. After Wu Jing understood the man in black's meaning, she returned the torch to him and said, I can do this to others, but I won't allow it to happen to him. You are also not allowed to use this punishment on him in the future. She still couldn't bear to see Qin Yang. Yes, the man in black replied fearfully. In fact, he could tell that his master was still reluctant to part with this pretty boy. However, this pretty boy did not appreciate his master's kindness, so his master had ordered them to punish him. Compared to the others, the punishment they gave Qin Yang was considered light. After thinking about this, The black-clothed man respectfully retreated to the side. As for Wuxian, she took out a medicinal pill, opened Qin Yang's mouth and fed it. Not long after, Qin Yang woke up. My heart ached when I saw you unconscious. The expression on her face was charming and charming. If it were any other man, they would have been mesmerized by her. Unfortunately, she had met Qin Yang. Qin Yang, who wanted to vomit whenever he saw her, would not even give her a good look, let alone fall in love with her. Moreover, he and Wu Yan had known each other for many years. This woman's character could not be hidden from him at all. Therefore, he despised Raimis from the bottom of his heart. When she saw that Qin Yang had only rolled his eyes at her, the anger in her heart burned even more fiercely. However, she did not want to torture Qin Yang anymore. She wanted Qin Yang to watch her torture others. With this thought in mind, Wu Chen immediately said to the black-robed man not far away, "Bring the torch over." Yes. After listening to Wu Xian's instructions, the man in black quickly brought a burning torch. The man in black, who thought that Wu Xian had changed her mind, saw with his own eyes that Wu Xian had set the stone pillar next to Qin Yang on fire. Suddenly, the man in black felt a chill in his heart. It seemed that he would have to be more merciful to Qin Yang in the future. The stone pillar next door that had been lit up quickly turned red, and hoarse roars of pain reached the ears of the people present. They were furious. However, even more people closed their eyes. They could not bear to see such a cruel scene. They had long been used to it. They were all cultivators. Although the torture was brutal, it only caused them superficial wounds, which were really nothing to them. The hoarse cry of pain lasted for a while before it disappeared. Everyone knew that the person had fainted from the pain. After doing all this, Wu Yan's anger was somewhat vented, but she was still not satisfied. Her beautiful eyes stared at the other people present. This time, she chose a woman. It was said that the opposite sex attracted each other, and the same sex repelled each other. There seemed to be an inextinguishable hatred between Wu Cheng and the woman. Even the way she looked at the woman was filled with hatred. However, when the woman saw Wu Xiao's expression, she smiled brightly. She really wanted to ask, "Do you hate me?" Chapter 2040, God Protecting Tower, 1. Seeing the woman's provocative gaze, the anger in her heart multiplied. Seeing her like this, the woman could not help but laugh. Ha ha ha. The woman laughed very proudly, and her scarred face looked even uglier because of her smile. Are you very happy? I don't know if you can still smile when you see your current appearance. Wu Lian suppressed the anger in her heart and said indifferently. When the woman heard her words, she didn't seem to care at all and laughed even more wildly. Yes, she had become ugly. Her face and body were covered in wounds, but so what? The person in her heart was no longer around. Even if she had a peerless face, who could she show it to? Therefore, she no longer cared about it. What she wanted to see the most now was what happened to Rhyme. She hoped that Rhyme would be even worse than her current state. Seeing that the woman only smiled, Wu Xiao continued. You're still so happy even though you've become an ugly monster. I really don't know what you're thinking. Wu Chen, even if I'm an ugly monster, I'm still happier than you. At least, Master you won't hate me. Do you still have the face to see Master you? Although they couldn't speak, in fact, they could still communicate through voice transmission. It was just that it would consume divine power. Therefore, in order to live longer and to see Wu Chen's fate one day, they tried their best to remain silent. However, at this moment, she couldn't bear it anymore. Don't mention him. Don't mention him. He was already dead. He had already disappeared from this world forever. You won't be able to see him anymore. I won't be able to see you anymore. The woman's words touched Wu Yan's sore spot, causing her to roar madly. In her heart, she could mention you and think of you, but she would not allow anyone to mention it in front of her. This woman had obviously violated her taboo. In the next second, the whips hit the woman's body as densely as raindrops. In an instant, the woman's blood splattered everywhere, and the fine pieces of flesh brought down by the barbs of the whips flew in the air. However, the woman gritted her teeth and resisted the urge to cry out. Her eyes were filled with deep hatred as she looked at Wu Jing. She knew that Wu Lian hated her because she was the only woman by Lord Ye's side other than Wu Lian. However, she was only Lord Yes subordinate while Wu Lian was Lord Yes sister in name. Therefore in reality, she was also jealous of Wu Lian. She admitted that she had caused trouble for the Fog Ripple in the past, but she had never thought of taking the Fog Ripple's life. Now she regretted it. If she had known that the Fog Ripple would betray Sir Yu, she would have ruthlessly gotten rid of this woman back then. Then Sir Yu would not have fallen. What a pity. There was no medicine for regret in this world. She had already tasted the evil consequences of cutting the grass and not removing the roots, but it was too late to say anything now. At this moment, she hated herself. She hated it so much that she was already numb to the pain in her body. Gradually, the pain intensified, and she could not bear it anymore and fainted. However, she did not make a sound from beginning to end. Seeing that the woman had fainted, Fog Ripple directly took a torch and lit the stone pillar. After a while, the woman woke up from the pain. Then, a rain of whips hit her body. However, she had long been numb. How could the pain of the body compare to the pain of the heart? Don't you feel pain? Did it really not hurt? Call it out. Scream. Seeing that the woman was holding on, the anger in Fog Ripple's heart had no way to be vented. Her slightly better mood was now in a mess again. The whip she hit the woman's body became more and more powerful, but the woman still did not make a sound. Seeing this scene, the black-clothed man's back broke out in cold sweat. He knew that his master hated this woman, so every time he tortured this woman, he would be the most severe. But compared to his master, the black-clothed man felt that he was still too kind. Because in less than a quarter of an hour, the woman was already a bloody mess, and her human form could not be seen. If this continued, would that woman still be alive? The man in black was even more speechless when he heard his master making the woman scream. The people here had all been fed mute medicine, so it would be difficult for his master's wish to hear the woman's voice to come true. Even if these people screamed out in pain, it was not the normal ah. It was an extremely unpleasant and hoarse voice. It was simply unbearable to the ears. Thinking of this, the man in black suppressed the fear in his heart and reminded, "Master, they've all been fed medicine. They can't make any pleasant sounds." The man in black spoke with great hidden meaning, and his eyes were full of respect as he looked at Wu Chun. However, in fact, his heart had been trembling the whole time because the man in front of him was too temperamental. Oh, I forgot about that. How about this? Give them the antidote immediately. I want to hear them scream in pain. Wu Xian thought for a moment and ordered. Yes. The man in black hurriedly responded, but he couldn't help but feel disgusted in his heart. It was really difficult to serve such a master. She was also the one who didn't want them to make a sound because of the noise. She was also the one who wanted to hear them scream in pain. She was really not ordinary. However, he could only think about these things in his heart. He definitely didn't dare to say it out loud. Otherwise, he would be the one who would lose his life. After the men in black fed the prisoners the antidote one by one, the curses in the prison cell continued. When Ripple heard these curses, she actually laughed very happily. When the men in black saw this, they couldn't help but feel disgusted. What a pervert. Bitch. You still have the face to laugh. Hearing Wu Xiao's wild laughter, the imprisoned people became even angrier and cursed even more harshly. What are you talking to a slut about? One of the men said weakly. Yup. Talking to her would only dirty our mouths, so we ignored her and only scolded her. Ha ha ha. Bitch. Ungrateful wolf. We won't let you off even if we die. For a moment, voices filled with hatred sounded in the cell. However, Wu Yan didn't care at all. The fiercer these people scolded, the happier she was. At least, she had achieved her goal. However, those people only cursed for a while before all of them shut their mouths and refused to say another word. Seeing this, Wu Jing couldn't help but roar. Curse! You guys can continue scolding. Only when she heard them scolding her would she feel that she was valued. Therefore, she had to admit that she was indeed a little perverted. Scolding you will dirty our mouths. Someone said with a look of disdain. Just now they were just venting. Now that they had scolded enough, they naturally wouldn't let Wu Chun, who obviously hadn't heard enough of their scolding, get what she wanted. Weren't you guys having a good time cursing just now? Continue scolding. Come, Continue scolding. Oh, kill anyone who doesn't. Ripple Mist glared at him with her beautiful eyes. You want to hear me scold you? I'm sorry, we don't have time to scold you. Someone else said. Then you can all go to hell. Wu Yan's anger burned. Immediately, 2 tentacles as thick as a baby's arm reached out to 2 of them and deeply stabbed into their bodies. In an instant, the 2 of them immediately shriveled up and became dry corpses. The 2 of them had also died. When everyone saw this scene, they knew that even their souls had been absorbed by the fog. This scene was not unfamiliar to them. So they only looked at the 2 of them miserably before they turned their heads and closed their eyes. Chapter 2041. God Protecting Tower 2. They had already made up their minds to die. Feeling the determination in their hearts, Wucheng was depressed. Because she found that she seemed to have overreached herself. Killing 2 people was just to kill the chicken to warn the monkeys. However, these monkeys were obviously not afraid of death. Therefore, not only did her scare not have any good effect, but it also made them more determined to die. However, how could Fog bear to let them die? She knew better than anyone that it would be the best for her if these people were alive. This was because these people were her inexhaustible source of energy, and the strength of these people was also what she coveted. Therefore they could not die. Thinking of this, Wu Jing called over the man in black and ordered, "Look after these people. The rest of them are not allowed to die." Yes, the man in black hurriedly replied carefully. He did not want to become his master's fertilizer, so naturally, whatever his master said he would firmly and strictly follow. After giving her instructions, Wu Yan was ready to leave. She had just absorbed some nutrients, so she had to go back and cultivate in seclusion to properly digest them. Although it had been a long time, the strength of those 2 people was still extraordinary. Therefore, it would probably take a few days to completely absorb their strength. At the same time, the fog disappeared. Seeing that Wu Xian had left, the man in black wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and heaved a long sigh of relief. Only then did he realize that his clothes had long been drenched. The next day, when Lung Ruoxue and the demon came out of the room, the explosion in the Divine Master's residence had almost ended. However, Lung Ruoxue would not let them stop just like that. Every time she saw them repairing a place, Lung Ruoxue would personally go over and place an explosive ball. Hence, the sound of explosions in the Divine Master's residence never stopped. The little beasts were having fun playing this game, but the people in the Divine Master's estate were all frowning and depressed. They didn't know which fearless god of plague the Divine Master's estate had provoked. He had actually come to the Divine Lord's estate again, and again to cause trouble. What was even more infuriating was that they couldn't catch him at all. Just like that, the Divine Master's estate was filled with dark clouds. Everyone's faces were as black as if their own father had died. As the 3 reverent god-level experts, they felt an unprecedented pressure, especially Huangwei and Xia Yi. The 2 of them had gone from being incompatible like fire and water to being partners with a smile. This showed the impact of this incident on the people of the Divine Master's estate. Xian Yi, who knew the truth, could only sigh with them every day with a sad face. He didn't dare to show any difference, but in fact he admired that little girl more and more. That girl was really bold. Even he couldn't help but be surprised. However, knowing that the Divine Master was in seclusion for the time being, Xianyi thought of a way to secretly inform Lung Ruoxue and the others about this. When Lung Ruoxue and the rest heard this, they did not take action immediately. They were afraid that Wu Xian was deliberately mystifying the situation to lure the snake out, so that they would walk right into the trap. In the bracelet, Lung Ruoxue and the rest were sitting in the garden, casually chatting. Girl Wu Lian is in closed-door cultivation. This is a good opportunity for us. Uncle Long said after some thought. I know that too. However, why would Wu Xian go into seclusion at this time? Now that the God Lord's estate is in such a mess, isn't it suspicious that she's in closed-door cultivation? Lung Ruoxue asked worriedly. It's a little suspicious, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. Regardless of whether the news of Fog Ripple's seclusion is suspicious or not, I think we should go and try. Uncle Long suggested. The The reason why he said this was because of Green Vessel. Otherwise, he would not have dared to take such a risk. All right then. Lung Ruoxue glanced at the evildoer before nodding. She had wanted to observe for a few more days, but since Uncle Long wanted to make a move, they would go and take a look. At that time, it would be clear at a glance whether Wuhan was really in seclusion or trying to lure them out. Sister, I don't recommend going to that secret room now. At this time, Qingju, who had been listening on the side, suddenly spoke. He knew that his sister and the others wanted to take advantage of the fog to enter the secret room. However, let's not talk about whether it was true or not. He felt that this matter was not that simple, because based on his understanding of Fog did not seem like someone who would enter seclusion at this time. With Fog's character, she should be furious at this time and should be venting her anger on the unlucky guy. Qingju understood rhyme very well. She had looked for someone to vent her anger on. However, because she had absorbed the energy of two people, she had no choice but to go into seclusion to digest it. However, Lung Ruoxue and the rest did not know about this. What they didn't know was that after Wu Yan absorbed the energy from the two people, there was a deviation in her digestion. A small accident happened because she was poisoned. This fact made Ripple Mist extremely angry. She thought that she was the ancestor of poison, and there was nothing more poisonous than her in this world. However, she was poisoned while absorbing someone else's energy. This result was simply unacceptable to her. What was even more troublesome was that the poison had been running around in her body and showed signs of assimilating her blood. This discovery made her a little afraid. After all, the blood in her body was extremely important to her. It could be considered the source of all her power. She had gone through a lot of trouble to purify her blood to its current purity. How could she allow those dirty things to taint her blood? Therefore, for the past few days, she had been fighting against the strange poison. Of course, Lung Ruoxue and the rest were not aware of her current situation. Otherwise, they would not have let go of such a good opportunity. When Lung Ruoxue heard Qingju's words, she smiled and asked, Qingju, do you have any good ideas? Sister, I want to build the God-protecting pagoda first. Qingju said bluntly. God-protecting pagoda? What is that place? This was the first time Lung Ruoxue had heard of this term. However, it was obvious that Uncle Long and Aojia had heard of this place before. After hearing what Qingju had to say, both of their faces turned solemn. The God-protecting pagoda is a pagoda that protects the safety of the divine world. Like me, it's an innate divine weapon born in the chaos. However, the God-protecting pagoda has no owner. Therefore, I would like sister to build the God-protecting pagoda first. I hope that the God-protecting pagoda will recognize sister as its master. Qingju stated his purpose, and then looked at Lung Ruoxue with a hopeful expression. When Uncle Long and Aojia heard what Qingju said, they could not help but gasp. They thought to themselves, this little fellow is so ambitious. Everyone in the divine world knew that the God-protecting pagoda was an innate divine weapon. The previous divine lord, Lord Yu, had also said that the God-protecting pagoda would only belong to those who were fated to obtain it. Therefore, there were countless gods who went to the God-protecting pagoda every day to try and see if it could recognize an owner. Unfortunately, after tens of millions of years, the God-protecting pagoda still remained ownerless. So he's the most suitable person to help us, Qingju promised. Actually, he had thought about it for a few days before he decided to let his sister obtain the recognition of the God Pagoda. Although the timing was not right, he could only do this for his sister's safety. Shui, why don't you go and try? After hearing Qingju's words, Uncle Long also advised. In reality, as a divine beast that had lived for a long time in the divine world, he knew very well how difficult it was to deal with the God-protecting tower spirit, and how annoying it was. However, there was no doubt about that fellow's strength. However, if Shui went now, she would probably be looked down upon by the tower spirit. Therefore, he was a little worried that Shui would not be able to withstand the tower spirit's humiliation. This was also the main reason for his hesitation. However, after thinking about it, he felt that it would be best to give it a try. Being scolded wouldn't hurt her anyway. And once Schwer was acknowledged by the tower spirit, it would definitely be a great thing for her. Are you serious, old whale? Don't you know how vicious the tower spirit's mouth is? How dare you let the little girl go? Aojie's eyes widened in disbelief when he heard what Uncle Dragon said. It doesn't matter if I try, it's not like you'll lose a piece of meat. Moreover, as a person from the divine realm, who wouldn't want to become the master of the god-protecting pagoda? Therefore, if we don't seize the time to try it now, we won't have the chance to do so after the god-protecting tower has found an owner. Uncle Long said matter-of-factly. But Aojie was about to retort when he was interrupted by Uncle Long. No buts, go and try. Uncle Dragon glared at Aojie, forcing him to swallow his words. In fact, he wanted to say that Schwer would definitely be scolded if she went because anyone who was not a divine emperor would be ruthlessly humiliated by the tower spirit. Although divine emperors would also be scolded, the scolding would be relatively light. The only ones who would not be scolded would probably be hierarch experts. However, this was not absolute. He had personally seen a hierarch being scolded by the tower spirit in public. In the end, that hierarch had never appeared in the divine world. Then I'll go and try. Seeing that Uncle Long had agreed, Lung Ruoxue could only agree. On the other hand, Green Vessel was a man of action. The moment Lung Ruoxue made her decision, he immediately brought them away from the unlucky Divine Master's residence and headed to the God Guardian Tower. The location of the God Protecting Tower was also within the Imperial City. However, the God Protecting Tower was a guy that guarded the territory, and no creatures were allowed to live in his territory. Therefore, back then you had to give half of the Imperial City to the God Protecting Tower. However, his location was relatively remote, and this was also what he had requested. When they were still some distance away from the God Protection Pagoda, Qingju took advantage of the fact that no one was around to teleport Lung Ruoxue and the other three out of the bangle. Then, Uncle Long brought them to the foot of the God Protection Pagoda. The God Protecting Pagoda was located on the mountainside of a mountain in the outskirts of Imperial City. When they arrived at the God Protecting Pagoda, Lung Ruoxue realized that there was no one else around other than the four of them. Even though it was a little strange, she could not help but exclaim in surprise as she looked at the God Protecting Pagoda that towered into the clouds and could not even see the tip of the pagoda. This God Protecting Pagoda is so tall. It's so magnificent. Of course, I'm the #1 pagoda in the divine realm. Right at this moment, a rather cocky voice entered Lung Ruoxue's ears. When she heard it, she could not help but frown. It seemed like the spirit of the God Protecting Pagoda was just like what the demon had said. It liked to listen to pleasant words. But immediately after, she heard the owner of the voice curse. You idiot trash. How can you get such a simple question wrong? What's the point of living? Don't your parents regret giving birth to you? If I were you, I would have killed myself. Hurry up and buy a piece of tofu. Hearing this scolding, Lung Ruoxue's face darkened even more. However, she knew that the spirit of the God Protecting Pagoda was definitely not scolding her. She just did not know who was so unlucky to be scolded so badly. But very quickly she saw a middle-aged man roll out from the two tightly shut doors of the tall God Guard Tower. That's right, that person had rolled out. Furthermore, he had rolled past Lung Ruoxue's feet, and had rolled down the mountain. Seeing this, Lung Ruoxue couldn't help but admire the wondrous idea of the God Protecting Pagoda. Needless to say, this was definitely the work of the God Protecting Pagoda's spirit. However, she didn't know what to say at this moment. Beauty, are you also here to gain my approval? Before Lung Ruoxue could think of a way to speak, the spirit of the God Protecting Pagoda spoke first. Yes, I am. Lung Ruoxue nodded and automatically ignored the word beauty. Actually, she wanted to say that she was a man, at least for now. However, she didn't know if the tower spirit had the ability to see her real body. After thinking about it, she decided not to be calculative about her gender. Then quickly come in. As soon as the spirit of the God Protection Tower finished speaking, Lung Ruoxue and the others felt as if they were being pulled into the tower by a strong force. Furthermore, this force was something that they could not resist. It was only after entering the pagoda that Lung Ruoxue realized that the pagoda was filled with people. However, all of them were currently in a daze. Without exception, all of them were immersed in their own thoughts and did not notice that an outsider had arrived beside them. The God Protection Tower spirit's curses continued to ring out, causing Lung Ruoxue to facepalm. This fellow really didn't give her any face at all. Even she couldn't bear to listen to it anymore. However, it was a good thing that she wasn't being scolded at this moment. Little girl, they should be in the middle of a trial. Uncle Long whispered to Lung Ruoxue after looking at the situation of the people present. Oh, Lung Ruoxue nodded as her beautiful eyes swept across the people around her. These people's trials should be carried out in their divine souls. She didn't know if they would be injured because once their divine souls were injured, it would be extremely difficult to recover. Don't worry, beauty, their souls won't be injured. The God Protection Tower spirit's voice rang in Lung Ruoxue's ears once more. Lung Ruoxue was instantly shocked. She never thought that this fellow would actually know what she was thinking. Sensing Lung Ruoxue's thoughts, the spirit of the God Protection Tower smiled in a very wretched manner and said, "Ha ha ha, beauty, none of your thoughts can hide from me, but don't be afraid. I won't tell anyone what you're thinking. I swear on my divine spark. How much is your divinity worth?" An extremely disdainful voice rang out. Following that, the white-robed Huan Chen appeared in the God-protecting tower. Chapter 2043. Sungwon. It's you. I was wondering who dared to talk to me like that. The spirit of the God-protecting tower seemed to be talking to itself. Furthermore, it was actually not angry. Lung Ruoxue's heart skipped a beat when she saw Huan Chen suddenly appear. She thought to herself, why is this fellow here again? She was helpless against illusionary dust's lack of control and her inability to play by the rules. After all, she had always been very tolerant of her beastie. Seeing Huan Chen's behavior, she could only classify him as a beastie. In any case, he definitely couldn't be considered human. Little master, am not beastie. Sensing Lung Ruoxue's inner thoughts, Huan Chen hurriedly said. However, he immediately felt a pair of eyes as cold as ice flying towards his back. Instantly, his heart started beating wildly. Woo! He had forgotten that this evil man had said that he was not allowed to read little master's heart. Sometimes he would read her heart in secret. This time, he had accidentally said it out loud and was caught red-handed by this evil man. Wouldn't he be dead for sure? At the thought of this, he could not help but move closer to Lung Ruoxue's side to seek protection. This evildoer should have some reservations when he was by little master's side, right? Huan Chen couldn't help but think to himself. In fact, he was too afraid of this monster. Other than looking at him coldly, he didn't want to do anything to him at all. At least, he didn't want to deal with him now. When Lung Ruoxue saw Huan Chen's frightened expression, she could not help but laugh in her heart. She even forgot what she wanted to say. In the end, it was Huan Chen who reminded her softly, "Little master, am not beastie." Lung Ruoxue finally remembered. It doesn't matter. I'll treat you like a beastie in the future. After hearing this, Huan Chen furrowed his brows, looking as if he had been wronged. Furthermore, just as he was about to rebut, he was interrupted by a certain inharmonious voice. "Ha! Huan Chen, I didn't expect you to have such a day. Raise it like a beast? Beauty, I like this suggestion." The Guardian Tower's spirit laughed exaggeratedly. Even though Lung Ruoxue and the others did not see the person, they could tell from the voice that the owner of the voice was extremely happy. However, they did not expect Huan Chen and the Guardian Tower's spirit to know each other. However, after thinking about it carefully, these two fellows had a very close relationship with Master Yu. So it seemed normal for the two to be familiar with each other. It's good that you like it. Lung Ruoxue glanced at the furious Huan Chen and said speechlessly. It seemed like the spirit of the God Protection Tower and Huan Chen had similar attributes. They both did not play by the rules. Just as Lung Ruoxue finished her sentence, Huan Chen's furious voice rang out. "You damn tower spirit, come out if you have the guts. Let's fight one-on-one. Tisk. You want to fight me one-on-one, so let's fight one-on-one." I'm busy, I don't have time to talk to you. You can go play in the mud by yourself. Good boy. Little Huanshan beastie. The God-protecting tower's spirit was so angry that it could kill. You're afraid, aren't you? You coward. Disloyal bastard. Hurry up and come out. I want to take revenge for my old master. If I don't beat you to the ground today, I'll take your surname. Huanshan continued to provoke her. Her originally fair face was now flushed with excitement, and it gradually deepened. Hearing the conversation between the two, cold sweat broke out on Lung Ruoxue and the rest's foreheads. What was going on? Why did these two guys start hurling abuse at each other? Lung Ruoxue, who was supposed to be scolded, had no choice but to watch the show. Uncle Long and Ao Jie, who had some understanding of the tower spirit, looked at Lung Ruoxue with envy and jealousy. This girl's luck was a little too good, wasn't it? The tower spirit had never scolded her since she entered. Was it possible that the tower spirit was also a lecherous person, valuing girls over boys? But that's not right. There were also many women who had come to undergo the master recognition trial. And as far as they knew, many of them had been scolded to tears by the tower spirit. Therefore they could not figure it out. In reality, if there were any other cultivators who were clear-headed right now, they would definitely be like Uncle Long and Ao Jie. They would be extremely envious and jealous of Lung Ruoxue, because every single one of them had been cursed at, and some had even been scolded from the beginning to the end. In short, the attitude of the tower spirit towards them was very bad. If things didn't go well, it would curse them to death, and some might even punch and kick them. The tower spirit said that this was a test for them. And once the word test was mentioned, no matter how angry the other party was, they would have to be as obedient as a little white rabbit and let the spirit of the God-protecting tower do whatever it wanted. However, Lung Ruoxue wasn't aware of all this. If she knew, she would definitely think that the tower spirit was using the name of a test to deal with someone she didn't like. But in reality, she was right. The tower spirit did have this intention. You damned old ghost. Disloyal bastard. Hurry up and get out here. Let's have a one-on-one fight. At this moment, Huanshan, who had been cursing nonstop, saw that the spirit of the God Protection Tower had suddenly stopped responding, so he continued to provoke it. But the God Protecting Tower spirit still didn't respond. Seeing this, Huanshan became depressed and cursed even harder. Lung Ruoxue could not help but facepalm as she looked at Huanshan roaring like a lion. This kind of Huanshan destroyed his image of a banished immortal in her heart. How could Huanshan be like this? At this moment, she couldn't say what she was feeling in her heart. In short, it was a complicated feeling. Huanshan, who had obviously peeked into Lung Ruoxue's thoughts, saw that his little master was a little depressed. He quickly consoled her. Little master, calm down. This guy really deserved a scolding. He won't come out if I don't scold him. Oh, Lung Ruoxue didn't know what to say, and could only reply with a soft oh. Then, the voice of the God-protecting tower spirit rang out as Huanshan had wished. You're the one who needs a scolding. I told you I'm busy. I don't have time for you. Tisk. Busy my ass. Do you think I don't know you? Huanshan cursed again. After he finished speaking, he even stole an apologetic glance at Lung Ruoxue. Seeing that Lung Ruoxue's reaction wasn't too big, he was relieved. What do you know about me? You only know how to sleep, you pig. The guardian spirit said with slight disdain. The more these two guys scolded, the more angry they became. It was obvious that Uncle Long and Ao Jie couldn't take it anymore. Uncle Long had no choice but to remind them. That dream dust. Your master is here for the master recognition trial. Although Uncle Long was just reminding him, the meaning behind his words was very clear. Your master is here for the master recognition trial. But you're the one who started the fight with the master here. It's not good for your master. Master recognition trial? Find this guy? Is there a mistake? This fellow is very perverted. How could he be worthy of my perfect and lovely master? Master, let's return. This guy isn't good, he's not suitable for you. As expected, Huanshan immediately stomped his feet when he heard Uncle Long's words. Then he advised Lung Ruoxue earnestly not to go through the master recognition trial. However, before Lung Ruoxue could react, The spirit of the God-protecting tower heard Huan Chen's words and immediately interrupted. You're the wretched one. You're the bad one. I'm an innate divine weapon born from chaos. It's a great honor to be my master. Chapter 2044. Song 2. The Guardian Tower Spirit's words were very arrogant, but Huan Chen kept shaking his head. He sighed and said, So what? You don't know how to recognize a master. So it's better not to talk about such trivial things. We won't disturb you any longer. You can slowly choose your master. After saying that, Huan Chen turned to Lung Ruoxue and said, Little master, if you have me, you won't be able to use the Guardian Tower Spirit. So let's not waste any more time here and go back. All right then. Even though Lung Ruoxue did not know why Huan Chen would say that, she still played along. When Uncle Long and Aojia heard what Lung Ruoxue said, they could not help but widen their eyes and asked, Are we just going to leave like this? Uncle Long, Uncle Ao, let's go back. Lung Ruoxue nodded with a smile. After saying that, the five of them turned around to leave. However, they had only taken 2 steps when a furious voice rang in their ears. All of you stop. If you want to leave without going through the master recognition trial, no way. Are you planning to force me to buy it? Lung Ruoxue was speechless. Why not? Since you're here, you must undergo the master recognition trial. Moreover, you can only leave when I tell you to. You want to run away by yourself? In your dreams. The Guardian Tower Spirit roared in an extremely overbearing manner. Hearing this, Lung Ruoxue couldn't help but be rendered speechless. This fellow was truly overbearing beyond normal. Couldn't he just take a stroll and witness the height and magnificence of the God-protecting pagoda? A beauty. I won't allow you to run away. Since you're here, you can only complete the master recognition trial. Otherwise, I'll never let you leave. Good girl. I will be gentler to you than to anyone else. Trust me. Sensing Lung Ruoxue's thoughts, the spirit of the God Protection Tower's attitude immediately became gentler. It continued to coax her. All right then. Lung Ruoxue knew that she had no choice but to agree. The moment she agreed, she was immediately enveloped by a white light and disappeared from the sight of Evil Demon and the others. Where's Schwerer? Seeing that Lung Ruoxue had disappeared, Aojia immediately started to worry. Little Master is going through the master recognition trial. Huan Chen laughed wretchedly. Then he gave the evildoer a victorious look. The two of them had a tacit understanding. Why is her trial different from the others? Looking at the stunned crowd around him, Aojia asked in a daze. Of course it's different. These people are only that old fart's playthings. They don't have the qualifications to accept the true trial. Huan Chen said. I see. Aojia seemed to have understood. According to this, many people should have been fooled by the God-protecting tower spirit.
At the same time, he was also somewhat glad that he was not a human and could not make the Guardian Tower spirit recognize him as its master. Otherwise, wouldn't he also become one of these humans? At the thought of this, Aojia could not help but turn his gaze to the evildoer and asked curiously, Schwer was taken to who knows where by that guy, aren't you worried at all? What's there to worry about? Schwer isn't a child anymore. The spirit of the God-protecting tower won't hurt her. The demon said calmly. The spirit of the God-protecting tower was born from the chaos. Although it was a divine weapon, it was of the same bloodline as him. Therefore, it would not harm Schwer, who also had the chaotic body. Instead, it would be very close to her. However, that fellow was born with a bad temper and did not play by the rules, so he was not sure what kind of treatment Schwer would receive. However, it would definitely not be like these people. Otherwise, he would not have agreed to let Schwer participate in the master recognition trial. But he might be scolded. Aojia whispered worriedly. I won tea. From the moment Schwer entered until now, have you seen the spirit of the God-protecting tower scold her? So, she won't be like these people. Don't worry. The demon laughed. Oh, that's true. Hearing the demon's words, Aojia was finally not so worried. However, he continued to ask, Then what are we going to do now? Wait. After saying that, the demon found a place to sit down. Uncle Dragon and Huan Chen also found their own places to sit. At the same time, Lung Ruoxue, who had been taken away by the white light, found herself in an empty room after the white light disappeared. The room was foggy and she could not see her fingers in front of her. However, the spiritual energy in the room was rather dense. After taking a few deep breaths, it immediately gave her a refreshing feeling. Girl, this place is not bad, right? It's not worse than that stinky bracelet, right? A voice that sounded like it was asking for a beating appeared by Lung Ruoxia's ears. How do you know? Lung Ruoxia was a little surprised. The spirit of the god-protecting pagoda actually knew that the universal bracelet was on her? TSK. We're both from the primal chaos, so I sensed him the moment he came to the divine realm. I just ignored him. And that S.I. Huanshan, the fact that he's by your side means that you have an extraordinary relationship with that idiot you. With my intelligence, of course I can guess. The Guardian Tower spirit explained proudly. You're very smart. You is my master. Lung Ruoxia nodded. Then she smiled and asked, May I know the name of the smart Guardian Tower spirit? Originally I couldn't, but seeing as you also have the chaotic body, I can tell you that my name is Tsong. How is it? Isn't this name very grand? Isn't it better than Qingju and Huanchen's names?
The god-protecting pagoda's Ling Tsong became Sundara as he spoke, and his tone was filled with anticipation. Not bad. Lung Ruoxia nodded. However, she did not admit that his name sounded better than Qingju and Huanchen's. After all, Qingju and Huanchen were on the same side, and she would not help outsiders. Then whose name is better? Song was obviously very insistent on this. Seeing that Lung Ruoxia didn't answer him directly, he could only ask again. They're all good. Left with no choice, Lung Ruoxia could only reply like this. However, Song was obviously not satisfied with this answer. He continued to speak in a slightly annoyed tone. No, you have to tell me whose name is better. Your names each have their own merits. You can't compare them like this. Wiping away the cold sweat on her forehead, Lung Ruoxia felt like she was about to go crazy. Why was this little fellow so insistent on this matter? It really put her in a difficult position. Girl, you're too dishonest. I'm angry. Song was still not satisfied with Lung Ruoxia's answer, and replied directly. Alright. You have a nice name. Lung Ruoxia gave in, and said the answer that Song wanted to hear the most. However, after saying this, Lung Ruoxia felt a little vexed. So, was she being threatened by evil forces? As expected, Azure was happy. He then said with extreme satisfaction, Neo finally told the truth, that's good. Come. Your mouth. Lung Ruoxia didn't know if she was being teased. But the answer was obviously yes. Lung Ruoxia didn't know how to react to Song's words, and could only stand there in a daze. After a long while she couldn't help but speak. Song. Can I start my master recognition trial? The faster she finished the trial, the faster she could leave this place and leave Song who dared to tease her. Chapter 2045. Song 3. It's not the beginning, it's already over. Cold laughed evilly. From his tone, one could clearly hear a trace of pride. However, Lung Ruoxia was a little dumbfounded. She had not done anything yet. How did it end? When did the master recognition trial begin? Why didn't she know about this? That. Lung Ruoxia was about to clarify when she was interrupted by Tsong. Neo. In fact, the question I asked you just now was my trial for you, If you don't say that my name is nice in the end, then you've failed the trial. However, even if you fail the trial, I will not let you go. I will only increase the difficulty of your trial. When you satisfy me and pass the trial, I will. You understand. Song knew that Lung Ruoxia was full of questions, so he explained patiently. The meaning of his words was that he had taken a fancy to Lung Ruoxia, so he had to let her pass his trial. However, after hearing Song's explanation, Lung Ruoxia was still confused and mumbled. I don't understand. This trial of yours is too much of a joke. This time she was really going crazy. Originally, she had thought of many ways to deal with it, and had planned to deal with it at any time. However, who knew that Song actually told her that she had passed the trial? Hearing this, Lung Ruoxia really wanted to curse out loud. However, her good upbringing allowed her to hold it in. However, the gloominess in her heart seemed to deepen. What the hell was this? Moreover, according to what she heard, if she didn't pass the trial just now, she couldn't leave and had to continue the trial. Did she understand it correctly? Song. Was he planning to cling on to her? At this moment, Lung Ruoxue did not know what to say. Was she considered to have a burst of character? The innate divine weapon that had not been able to recognize an owner for tens of millions of years, had only met her once, and asked a simple question like whose name sounded better. After getting a satisfactory answer, he had passed the trial? Lung Ruoxue felt as though she was still in a dream. It felt so unreal. She couldn't help but pinch her own arm. It was only after she felt the pain that she believed that everything she had just experienced was real. But even so, she still felt like she was in a dream. Ehe. Neo. That's because she likes you. You're the most pleasing woman I've seen in all these years. Although you're a man now, you'll change back one day. You also have the chaotic body, so you're qualified to be my master. From now on, you'll be my master, so you'll have to love me well. Song, who could sense Lung Ruoxue's thoughts, continued to explain. Don't you think you're playing around? Lung Ruoxue could not help but ask. I don't think so. I think I'm being very cautious. Besides, for so many years, almost no one has caught my eye. Now that I've finally met one, of course I can't let him go. Song's proud voice drifted into Lung Ruoxue's ears. Other than sighing, Lung Ruoxue was still sighing. My master isn't even worthy of your attention? The helpless Lung Ruoxue asked out of curiosity. How high was Song's standard? She didn't even like her master, and this fact made her even more depressed. However, why did he take a fancy to her? She didn't think that she could compare to her master. Yes, he's a man. I don't like it. Besides, he's an idiot. I want a cute and smart girl to be my master. Song said matter-of-factly, but what Lung Ruoxue didn't know was that Song, who was hidden behind the thick fog, actually blushed when he said that. Yes, he was shy. However, when Lung Ruoxue heard Song's words, she didn't know how to react. This was not the first time she had heard someone say that her master was an idiot. The evildoer had said the same thing before. In addition, Azure had said that he wanted to find a soft girl to be his master. She didn't know that the artifact spirit had become so lecherous these days. Was she outdated? Seeing that Lung Ruoxue didn't respond for a long time, Song became anxious and quickly asked, Girl, you don't like me? I'm very cute. You'll definitely fall in love with me when you see me. Is that so? Lung Ruoxue couldn't help but wipe away the cold sweat on her forehead. Her intuition told her that these words must not be heard by that evildoer. Otherwise, little Song, who she had never met before, would probably lose his life. Of course. Song was being cocky again, and he automatically ignored Lung Ruoxue's thoughts. Following that, Lung Ruoxue felt a weight in her arms and subconsciously reached out to hug it. The fluffy touch in her hands made her heart skip a beat, and she almost let go of the thing in her hand. However, a familiar voice stopped her. Girl, it's me. Hearing this voice, Lung Ruoxue couldn't help but lower her head. Immediately, her beautiful eyes met a pair of dark, bright, and moist eyes. At this moment, those wet black eyes were looking at her shyly and timidly. The thing in her hand was a Snow White Totoro. That's right, the furry little thing in her hand was a Totoro. However, this Totoro was a few sizes bigger than the Totoro that Lung Ruoxue had seen in her previous life. It was also cuter. Its entire body was chubby, and it felt pretty good to the touch. Lung Ruoxue, who had never been able to reject cute little animals, couldn't help but stroke the Totoro's body a few times when she saw this super large Totoro. Following that, she saw the Snow White Totoro's body begin to glow with a faint pink. Was this the rhythm of being shy? Girl, I told you you would fall in love with me. I'm so cute. People rarely reject me unless they're not human. The moment the cute Totoro opened its mouth, its cocky personality was revealed. Lung Ruoxue had to admit that Song was cuter when he didn't speak. You're really Song? Lung Ruoxue, who was still worried, asked for confirmation. I'm sure. Song laughed. Then he shifted into a more comfortable position in Lung Ruoxue's arms and sneaked up against Lung Ruoxue's tall mountain peak. He couldn't help but think in his heart, the embrace of a soft girl is still the most comfortable. It was soft. And it smells so good. It was really good. Of course, it couldn't let its wretched thoughts be known by its master, who it took so much effort to take a fancy to, especially the man beside its master. It had to be more vigilant. With this thought in mind, Song became serious again and obediently lay in Lung Ruoxia's arms. Are you really willing to recognize me as your master? Lung Ruoxia continued to ask. She still felt that this matter wasn't too real, and she had no way of convincing herself to believe it. Of course. Otherwise, why would I bring you here? You should know that this is not a place that just anyone can come. Actually, he was very clear in his heart that Huan Chen had intentionally provoked him, so that he would acknowledge this lass as his master. Moreover, he had a very good impression of this soft little sister, Lung Ruoxia. Hence he went with the flow. In short, everyone had a tacit understanding. Where is this place? After hearing Song's words, Lung Ruoxia's curiosity was piqued again. This is where I live, and it's also the control center of the God-protecting tower. However, unless I bring you here, you can't appear here as you please, even if you're my master. Azure laughed. However, as my master, you can ask me for anything if you want to come here. I can't refuse you. Song was afraid that Lung Ruoxia didn't understand, so he added, "Oh, what's the benefit of coming here?" Lung Ruoxia asked again. Even though she didn't expect that after becoming the master of the God Guardian Tower, she wouldn't be able to come here as she pleased. She wanted to know what was the difference if she came here or not. Nyo can practice here. The spiritual chi here is definitely much more than that stinky bracelet. Moreover, I have always been at my peak, and my control of time is also better than that stupid bracelet. In addition, I know the heaven-defying art very well, and I can better guide you. So Nyo can practice here in the future. Azure said with a smile. Then other than me, can my family and subordinates come in to cultivate? Lung Ruoxia asked after hearing Song's words. They can't come here, but I can arrange another place for them. The time flow will definitely be much faster than in the bracelet, which is also very beneficial for them. Cold Truth said. Oh, Lung Ruoxia acknowledged softly, feeling her head throb. If she was the only one who could come, the demon would definitely not agree. It seemed like she did not need to consider cultivating here. Sensing Lung Ruoxia's thoughts, Cold One gritted his teeth and hardened his heart. That guy can follow us in, but no one else can. I see. All right then. Lung Ruoxia wasn't satisfied, but she could tell that this was Song's biggest compromise. At this moment, Qingju's angry voice suddenly rang out in the empty room. Damned Song, you actually dared to steal my girl? Qingju was furious, and the consequences were very serious. In the past, his sister had been cultivating in the bracelet. He could sense her condition at any time. After the appearance of the illusion dust, he had already snatched his sister away once. Now this damned Song wanted to snatch his sister away from him. He could endure it, but he could not. No matter how good his temper was, Qingju could not tolerate it anymore. Chapter 2046. Hurry up and get the mist ripple out. 1. When Song heard Qingju's angry roar, he didn't get angry. Instead, he laughed even more flirtatiously and said with an annoying face, "So what if I steal your girl? Bite me." Lung Ruoxia fell silent upon hearing this. Qingju was so angry that he could not speak. He wanted to bite, but he could not. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. In the end, he could only express his anger by roaring, "Song, just you wait, I'll teach you a lesson one day. I'll be waiting for you. However, if you can't defeat me, don't cry." Azure laughed evilly. Then he changed his position in Lung Ruoxia's arms and laughed nonstop. Lung Ruoxia glanced at Song, who was laughing so hard that his stomach was shaking. She didn't know what to say. This Song had a very different personality. At this moment, in order to change the topic and resolve the conflict between the two little fellows, Lung Ruoxia had no choice but to take the initiative and ask, "Song, when do you plan to recognize me as your master?" "No rush. Girl, your current strength is too low. If you want to recognize me as your master, You must at least be a divine emperor. Otherwise, you will be injured. Azure said very seriously. My ass. If even the origin of chaos can acknowledge me as his sister, why can't you? Before Lung Ruoxue could react, Qingju's disdainful voice was heard again. I said no, so no, why? You're not convinced. Hearing Green Vessel's words, Song didn't want to explain. Instead, he roared in a domineering manner. Yes, I'm not convinced. Song. Don't dawdle and quickly recognize him as your master. We still have important things to do. I don't have time to chat with you. Qingju urged. Song's personality was unpredictable and he didn't play according to the rules. Hence, he was afraid that Song would go back on his words. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so anxious to force Song to recognize him as his master. However, how could Song be so easily manipulated by others? Its small face turned serious and said in a non-negotiable tone, I can't recognize you as my master now. It's not the right time. Girl, I'll only recognize you as my master when you become a divine emperor. In fact, I'm already taking good care of you. If it were someone else, they must have the strength of a reverent god. Oh, since that's the case, you can only recognize me as your master after I become a divine emperor. Lung Ruoxue said indifferently. She didn't have much of an opinion about this. After all, she was only here to try it out. Furthermore, she believed that Azure must have its own reasons for not wanting to recognize her as its master. Hence, she didn't want to put it in a difficult position. Girl, I'm really doing this for your own good. The origin of chaos will acknowledge you because you have the chaotic body and it has a sense of intimacy with you. So as long as you can withstand its energy, it will be able to accept you. But I'm different. My requirements are high. If you want me to acknowledge that you are qualified to be my master, you must meet my requirements. Although I have initially recognized you as my master, if you don't meet my high standards and strict requirements, I will not acknowledge you as my master. So, in order for me to recognize you as my master as soon as possible, I've decided to train you personally from today on. Prepare to take the challenge. Azure said with anticipation. Well, start training today. Lung Ruoxue blinked her beautiful eyes as she confirmed. Yes. From today onwards, we have to make good use of our time. I also want to recognize you as my master as soon as possible. Azure was very anxious. If it wasn't for the fact that the master it had taken a fancy to was too weak, it would have directly acknowledged him as its master. But now, it could only work harder and try its best to cultivate its master into a good master that met its requirements. Not today. I still have other things to do. After Lung Ruoxue confirmed it, she rejected him immediately. What could be more important than my training? Hearing this, Azure's eyes widened in disbelief. He had originally thought that his future master would be very satisfied with his arrangement, but who knew that this girl would actually say no? It was instantly enraged. If he didn't train now, when would it recognize him as its master? I have to save my senior brother first. I can't start training today, so I'm not sure when I can start your training. Lung Ruoxue spoke the truth. There was a trace of apology on her beautiful face. She could feel Song's eagerness and hope for his master to become a dragon. Unfortunately, her priority now was to save her senior brother. Hence, she could only say sorry to Song. Your senior brother? What's wrong with him? Azure asked somewhat curiously. Nio's senior brother should be Dummy Yes' other disciple, right? Although it had heard of it, it had never seen it before, so it naturally did not pay attention to Nio's so-called senior brother's situation. He's injured and needs the petals of the mist to detoxify, so, Lung Ruoxue explained, but before she could finish her sentence, Song interrupted her. You're looking for the flower petals of rime ice? He was really looking for death. With your strength? You must be dreaming. Songjin said honestly. He was not optimistic about Lung Ruoxue's goal, even if she had the help of that man. After all, this was the God world and not the Nine Nether prison. Even if it's a dream, I have to find a way to get the petals of rime ice. I can't not save my senior brother, so I can't accept your training for the time being. Lung Ruoxue said with determination. Do you know the difference in strength between you and that old woman? With your current strength, you're simply courting death. If that old woman finds you, you'll lose your little life. Moreover, your chaotic body is definitely a great tonic for her. No. I can't let you take this risk. Azure strongly opposed. The hair on its body stood on end. From this, it could be seen how excited it was. Then you should help big sister. With your help, it won't be difficult for elder sister to get the petals from the fog phoenix's body. At this moment, Qingju's voice rang out again, and he made a request in a self-righteous manner. No. I can't and can't help her. This is beyond her ability, so I can't allow her to do this. No, Cold rejected without even thinking. In reality, although it had chosen Lung Ruoxue, it hoped that the master it had chosen would be someone who knew how to judge the situation and had self-awareness. She would not be someone who was too ambitious and would do as much as she could. If she knew that she could not do it, then such a person was not worthy of being its master. It hoped that its master was smart, calm, and knew how to endure. Only such a person could achieve great things. Hence, it had no intention of helping Lung Ruoxue. When Lung Ruoxue heard Song's words, she didn't show any dissatisfaction. In fact, she could understand Song's thoughts because this matter was too far-fetched for her current strength. However, she did not intend to fight with Wu Jing head-on. Therefore, she never thought that she did not have any chance at all. At the thought of this, Lung Ruoxue calmly said, Song, I won't force you if you don't want to help me, but I hope you won't try to stop me. I must save my senior brother, so I can't participate in your training now. Please send me out of here. Chapter 2047. Hurry up and get the mist ripple out, too. Lung Ruoxue's words were unusually calm, but when Song heard it, he started to think. This girl was the only master it had taken a fancy to in so many years. If something happened to her, it would definitely regret it. So Song was at a loss. Should he help or not? In reality, it really hoped that this girl would be able to use her own strength to defeat Wu Chen. However, from the looks of it now, this was definitely not realistic. The difference in strength between the two of them was not just a little bit. Furthermore, this girl Lung Ruoxue was extraordinarily stubborn. AI. What should it do? After thinking hard for a long time, Song finally made up his mind. Girl, I said I wouldn't help you, so I definitely want help. However, I can think of a way to hinder Wu Xiao for a while. At that time, whether you can get the petals from her body will depend on you. So don't count on me. Song spoke bluntly. Although his words were a little unreasonable, Lung Ruoxue was still happy to hear him say this. Because just now Green Vessel had clearly told her that even if Song only came out to obstruct fog, their chances of winning were very high. At the thought of this, Lung Ruoxue gently stroked Song's soft fur with gratitude and said, Song, thank you. No need to thank me. Helping you is also to let you finish what you have to do as soon as possible, so that you can accept my training with peace of mind as soon as possible. But this doesn't mean that I will agree with your decision. It was better to do less things that were beyond his ability. Moreover, I want to tell you that even if you become my master, you shouldn't rely too much on me. Unless I think it's necessary, I won't help you easily. Most of the time, you still have to rely on yourself. I hope you can understand. When Song said this, it was as if he had changed into a beast, rather cold and heartless. When Lung Ruoxue heard this, she only nodded her head indifferently and said, I understand. How could she not know that it was better to ask for help than to ask for help from others? However, when Green Vessel heard Song's words, he was rather dissatisfied. So many years have passed, I didn't expect you to still be so cold-blooded. No wonder no one likes you. Tisk. As long as I like myself, I don't need others to like me. Moreover, haven't you heard of the saying a loving mother will spoil her son? We are artifact spirits, not nannies. If the master can't meet our requirements, then it's fine to not have such a master. So, I won't be like you, accommodating my master everywhere and obeying my master's words as imperial edicts. Therefore, the master that I acknowledge must be a dragon and phoenix among 10,000 people, girl. Don't let me down. Song said with a serious expression. Although it was saying this for Green Vessel, its dark eyes were fixed on Lung Ruoxue. Its fluffy little face was filled with anticipation. I will work hard. Lung Ruoxua looked straight at Song and said seriously. She knew that Song and Green Vessel treated her differently. Green Vessel was taking care of her, while Song was using the opposite method to spur her on. To put it bluntly, Song wanted to become a dragon. Even though Green Vessel had the same thoughts, Green Vessel's methods were gentle, while Green Vessel's were rough and direct. Regardless of which method they used, they were both for her own good. Hee. Girl, I knew I didn't misjudge you. Song was extremely satisfied with Lung Ruoxua's words. He found Lung Ruoxua more and more pleasing to the eye. Furthermore, he had also secretly decided that if Nyo was unable to obtain the petal of that old woman's main body, he would help her. After all, it didn't want this matter to always involve this girl's thoughts, but this was the only time. It definitely wouldn't do it again. Then send me away now, Lung Ruoxua asked anxiously. She was suddenly taken away by the white light, and she wondered if the evildoer and the others were worried. Hee. I've already stopped time, so the time outside won't change while you're here. Besides, to others, you've only disappeared for a short while, so I'll show you around the god-protecting pagoda before sending you off. Understanding Lung Ruoxua's thoughts, Azure smiled. In reality, it wanted to say, you can cultivate here for a while before you leave. It was a pity that it knew that Nyo had something on her mind and would not calm down to cultivate, even if the time outside did not flow. Hence, it could only settle for the second best option, which was to let Lung Ruoxua familiarize herself with the environment. All right then. Sensing Song's determination, Lung Ruoxua could only agree. After all, from her point of view, it wouldn't take long for them to visit this place. Girl, follow me. On Song Dao, the moment he finished speaking, Lung Ruoxua was brought to a control room. Lung Ruoxua lifted her beautiful eyes and sized up the control room. This control room was about the size of a football field. The surrounding walls were crystal clear, and the material was similar to crystal. However, the decoration inside was very simple. In addition to a few wide light screens, there was only a chair placed in front of the light screen. At this moment, Song had already jumped onto the chair from Lung Ruoxua's embrace. He even waved at Lung Ruoxua and said, Girl, quickly come over. From here you can see those guys who are in the trial. Oh, when Lung Ruoxua heard this, she walked to Song's side. Then, her beautiful eyes looked at the screen. The moment she took a look, her forehead was filled with black lines. At this time, the largest screen in the middle had been divided into tens of thousands of small screens, and the people in the light screens were having a quick-witted question and answer session. However, the clothes of the person in the light screen were already torn and tattered, and he looked quite embarrassed. Seeing this, Lung Ruoxua was a little suspicious. Were these people's real bodies or divine souls? Seeing the confusion on Lung Ruoxua's face, Azure smiled and said, These people are really too stupid. How could they get such a simple question wrong? Your trial for them is to let them answer questions? Lung Ruoxua could not help but ask. Of course. However, if they answer incorrectly, they will be punished. They only have 100 chances, which means that there are 100 questions for them to answer. If they answer all 100 questions, they will be kicked out by me, hee. Azure said proudly. Then are they in their divine soul state right now? Lung Ruoxua asked again. Yes. However, in the God-protecting tower, even if it's a divine soul, their bodies can also feel it. And their current appearance is exactly their original appearance. Azure explained. Lung Ruoxua understood the moment Song explained it. Lung Ruoxua was filled with deep sympathy for those who were undergoing the trials because she happened to hear a virtual voice asking from one of the screens. What is 1 + 1? After the man replied that it was equal to 2, he was beaten up by the virtual brawny man. That person was still being continuously scolded. Idiot! You idiot! After the punishment, the virtual voice asked again. The beast or the egg came first? The man hesitated for a long time, and did not dare to answer. Finally, in the countdown of the virtual voice, the man seemed to have made up his mind and said, First beast. Chapter 2048. Hurry up and get the fog ripple out. 3. Following that person was beaten up again. The sound of people being scolded for being stupid could be heard continuously. When Lung Ruoxue saw this, she felt a deep sense of powerlessness. Why was it that the more she heard about it, the more she felt that she had been to her previous life? This witty question and answer was clearly a brain teaser's. Moreover, many of these questions had been discussed for a long time, and it seemed that no one had given the perfect answer. So, after listening for a while, she could tell that this was not a trial. It was clearly Tsang who was bored and was pranking people. Tsang, they don't need to go through the master recognition trial now, right? Lung Ruoxue couldn't stand it anymore and reminded him, sigh. These people were really too pitiful. She reckoned that no matter how they answered, they would probably be beaten up. Yes, but the trial will still continue. After all, it's not the right time to reveal our relationship yet. Therefore, we can't lose these people yet. Cold said it so matter-of-factly that Lung Ruoxue couldn't refute it. Furthermore, she also understood that Cold wasn't just bored. It was treating the people who came to the trial as toys. At the thought of this, she could only shift her gaze away, not looking at those guys who had made themselves so pitiful for the trial. Her beautiful eyes turned to the other light screens, which were displaying the scenery of the divine world. Upon seeing this, Lung Ruoxue could not help but ask, "Can we see the entire divine realm through the light screen here?" "Of course," Azure said proudly. "Then can I take a look at the land of demons?" Lung Ruoxue said after some thought. "No problem," he said. "Yes," Song replied. Then one of the screens flashed and the full view of the land of demons appeared in front of Lung Ruoxue. When Lung Ruoxue saw her home and so many familiar faces, she was instantly excited. This time, her grandfather and the others didn't come with her to the imperial city. Now that she could see them through the screen, she was exceptionally happy. She missed them. "Girl, go out. The sooner you obtain the petals of the mist, the sooner you can go home." At this moment, Song noticed that Lung Ruoxue's mood was a little agitated and reminded her. However, there was something that he didn't say. With the flower petals in his hands, the training that he arranged for his future master was about to begin. However, when Lung Ruoxue heard Song's words, she didn't doubt him and nodded her head. "And send me out." Although she missed her grandfather and the rest, she knew what was most important right now. Following that, a white light flickered before Lung Ruoxue's eyes. When she opened her eyes again, she had already returned to the side of the demon and the rest. Seeing Lung Ruoxue's sudden appearance, Uncle Long and Aojie heaved a sigh of relief. Even though they had confidence in Lung Ruoxue, they were still worried. "Schwer, how is it?" Aojie asked impatiently. "Is Schwer done with her trial? How could he be so fast? It couldn't be that he didn't go through the trial, right? After all, those who had taken part in the trial before Lung Ruoxue had yet to finish their trials." And when he saw Lung Ruoxue's unscathed appearance, he could not believe that this little girl's trial had ended. "It's all right. Azure agreed to help us hold off Rhyme Phoenix for a while. At that time, we just have to think of a way to get the petals from Rhyme Phoenix's body." Lung Ruoxue said directly. "Azure is the name of the spirit of the god-protecting pagoda? Did he recognize you as his master?" Uncle Long asked nervously. The moment he finished asking, Aojie immediately looked at Lung Ruoxue nervously. "Yes, it said that it's willing to recognize me as its master. However, it thinks that my current strength is too low and wants to train me. It will only recognize me as its master if I meet its requirements." Lung Ruoxue explained with a smile. This artifact spirit really has a personality." Aojie could not help but click his tongue. But thinking about it, it made sense. It was an innate divine weapon. How could it recognize a master so easily? If that was the case, he would not have been picky for so many years. It's fine if he has a bit of character. An expert can't be without character. Moreover, with his help, we'll have a greater chance of obtaining the petal of the mist. After Uncle Long confirmed it, he couldn't contain his joy. This news was like the sound of nature to him. "Schwer, that Azure will only help us to obstruct the rhyme ice, but he won't make a move, right?" Aojie also confirmed. "Yes." Lung Ruoxue nodded. "Ai. It's such a pity. If he was willing to help, we would have 100% chance of getting the rhyme ice flower petals. Aogia's face was filled with regret. He knew very well how powerful the god-protecting tower spirit was. I'm afraid that guy's strength isn't below Master US, but unfortunately he's not willing to help. Be content. This is already very good. Hearing Aogia's words, Uncle Long rolled his eyes. He didn't expect the spirit of the god-protecting tower to help them deal with rime ice. If he really wanted to, those things wouldn't have happened back then. Uncle Long is right. Sung didn't want to help us at first, but now he's willing to help us delay rime ice and buy us some time. It's already not easy, said Lung Ruoxue. Song had even helped her to confirm that Fog's true form was indeed hidden in the secret room that she had suspected. However, it was hidden by an array formation, so outsiders could not see it. Song had even told her how to break the array formation. For this, she was very grateful to Tsang. Although Tsang's goal was only to hope that she could receive training as soon as possible, there was no such thing as free help in this world, right? Since that's the case, let's not delay any further. We should quickly sneak back to the spiritual abode. Uncle Long suggested. Yes. Lung Ruoxue nodded. Then, with a thought, she brought the few of them into the bangle. Following that, Green Vessel turned into dust just like how it had come, bringing them back to the Divine Master's residence. This back and forth only took a few hours, but the chaos in the God Lord's manor was still not over. The people in the God Lord's manor were still busy cleaning up the obviously dilapidated courtyard. At this moment, Lung Ruoxue received Song's voice transmission, asking them to wait for him in the courtyard. After informing Green Vessel found a remote corner and landed. Then everyone's eyes turned to the light screen. After about 2 hours, Song still had not appeared. Aogia could not help but feel anxious. Girl, when will Song come? Aogia really wanted to see the legendary and domineering guardian tower spirit. Unfortunately, he had waited for so long and did not even see a shadow. Soon. Azure said that he was delayed by something and told us to wait. Lung Ruoxue replied helplessly. However, as soon as she finished speaking, everyone felt the light screen in front of them tremble. Then, they heard a domineering roar. Get the fog out here. Everyone was stunned and looked towards the source of the voice. They saw a petite, snow-white Totoro standing in the middle of the light screen. The voice they heard clearly didn't match this small figure. However, no one would look down on this small fellow because Uncle Dragon and Aogia had already understood that this should be the god-protecting tower, Ling Tsang. However, none of them had expected that Azure's appearance was actually that of a cute little beast. However, after spending so much time with Lung Ruoxue, they knew that one could not judge a book by its cover, be it human or beast. If he looked down on her just because she looked cute, he would definitely be in for a tragedy. It was obvious that the people in the Divine Master's estate were going to have a tragedy. At this moment, Song was standing in the middle of the screen in the courtyard of the Divine Master's estate. He was looking down at the people surrounding him with a domineering aura. He raised his little white meaty claws, revealing a shiny and sharp curved hook. Song repeated. Quickly get rhyme to come out for this lord. Hearing these words again, Lung Ruoxue and the rest were in a mess. They couldn't help but think to themselves, what a domineering Song. After hearing Song's words, the few of them turned to look at the demon simultaneously. Then, they thought to themselves that even the demon would not dare to say such words so openly. After all, his identity could not be exposed. If he appeared in the divine world as the master of the dark world, it would definitely cause panic in the divine world. But Song dared. In an instant, Song's image and Uncle Dragon and Aogia's hearts became much bigger. Look. This was what a true divine weapon was. It was so domineering and satisfying. Even though Uncle Dragon and Aogia wanted to shout for Fog Ripple to come out just like Song, they might not be a match for Fog Ripple even if they joined forces. Therefore, they could only think about it in their hearts. However, when they heard Yusho's words, they were definitely proud. In contrast to the excitement of Uncle Long and the others, the people in the God Lord's estate were completely stunned. With their mouths half open, many people were unable to come back to their senses for a long time. This This sentence was too much of a shock to them, wasn't it? Who was that fog ice? The current divine master. But now, there was a cute little beast waving its sharp claws and shouting for the master god to come out. Where did it get such courage from? Among the crowd, the three hierarchs with the highest status were the first to regain their senses. However, even after they had regained their senses, they were still in a daze. Although the little beast in front of them was not the only one in the divine realm, as far as they knew, the Totoro clan did not seem to have such courage. Then, did this Totoro take the wrong medicine? The three of them had the same thought, but before they had the chance to voice their doubts, Azure was getting impatient. Didn't you guys hear what I said? Hurry up and get the rippling mist out, or else don't blame me for razing the God Lord's estate to the ground. Chapter 2049. Wanton Destruction. 1. Seeing that the bunch of idiots in the God Lord's residence only looked at him blankly after hearing his words, Song was not happy. These idiots. No wonder they could only be the subordinates of that old woman, Wu Cheng. They were really too inexperienced. It had said it several times, but no one had gone to report to Wu Cheng. What made it even angrier was that Wu Cheng, that old woman, didn't come out by herself. This fact made Song, who already had a bad temper, so angry that he was about to go crazy. The consequences of making it angry would be very serious. Although Lung Ruoxia and the rest were observing everything through the light screen, they could already faintly see the snow-white Song without a single strand of stray hair. His body was already emitting a thick black mist. It was obvious that Song was quite angry. Seeing this, Lung Ruoxia and the others could not help but pray for the people in the Divine Master's residence. Of course, most of them were gloating. Lung Ruoxia wanted to admire Xiatsong's destructive ability. Ever since Green appeared and repeated his words many times, but other than being stunned, he did not have any other reaction. Green Vessel had been mumbling non-stop beside her ear. We're finished. It's finished. The God Lord's manor was in trouble. These people are going to be in big trouble. His tone was also gloating. In the next second, a powerful air current erupted from Azure's body. The small Azure suddenly grew in size. In the blink of an eye, Azure's body had become a huge mountain. The people from the god's manor, who had to look down at it, instantly turned into tiny ants. They had to look up at Azure. The pressure from Song's body made it hard for many people to breathe. Many people's faces had clearly turned much paler, and the weaker ones were like leaves in the autumn wind, teetering on the verge of collapse. Seeing this, the three hierarch experts of the God Lord's estate sobered up and calmed down. They looked at the enormous snow-white Totoro with heavy hearts. As far as they knew, the Totoro clan had always been weak and existed more as the pets of some families' daughters. Their attack power was also very weak. However, the one in front of them was beyond their expectations. Even as reverent god level, they had to spend some effort to resist the pressure from this one. Not to mention others. A strong enemy. This was definitely a strong enemy. Moreover, this powerful enemy was here to find the Divine Master. He wondered how the Divine Master had provoked this person. The three of them could not understand. In fact, it was normal that they didn't understand because the one in front of them wasn't a real Totoro, but an image that Song had created. Apart from having a bad temper, Azure also liked to turn itself into a harmless and cute little animal to deceive the world and lure those who didn't have eyes to provoke it. Those people naturally didn't end up well, but Azure was very happy because it was too bored. This was also a bad taste it never got tired of. Unfortunately, not many people knew the inside story. Most of the people were deceived by Song's harmless appearance. However, it was too late when they found out the truth. However, many people chose to remain silent after being deceived. They did not expose this matter. On one hand, they were afraid of embarrassing themselves. On the other hand, it was human nature. When they were unlucky, they naturally did not want others to have a good time. It was precisely because he hoped that someone else would suffer the same fate as him that he had been successful in every endeavor for tens of millions of years. To this day, no one knew that there was a pseudo-Totoro in the divine realm that had been deceiving the blind people of the divine realm with its weak appearance. At the same time, no one would associate the Totoro with Azure. After all, not many people had seen Azure's appearance. Therefore, when the people of the God Lord's estate saw the powerful Totoro, they were unable to react for a long time. Azure had only displayed a little of his strength, and many people in the God Lord's estate could not bear the pressure. Seeing this, Song slightly restrained his own pressure, then cleared his throat and said loudly, "Where's Fog? Hurry up and get her out here. Don't make me wait too long." When Song shouted, he deliberately infused his divine power into his voice, making it several times louder. Instantly, many people couldn't take it and subconsciously covered their ears, their faces showing pained expressions. Seeing such a weak so-called strong person, Azure's clear black eyes revealed a disdainful expression. Then, as if looking down at ants, it glanced at the people below and said indifferently, "No one is willing to help me inform them? This lord's patience is limited. Senior, the God Lord is currently in seclusion. May I know what's the matter? When the Divine Master comes out of seclusion, we'll definitely inform him of Senior's intentions as soon as possible." At this moment, Xianyi, who was obviously much calmer, spoke with an extremely humble attitude. He already knew that the Totoro's identity was not simple, so he naturally did not dare to be negligent. In seclusion? Even if you're in closed-door cultivation, you have to come out. Hearing Xianyi's words, Song still roared in a domineering manner. Of course, it knew that the old woman was in seclusion. However, it had nothing to do with it. Anyway, it must get the old woman out. Otherwise, where would its dignity be? Moreover, it had just injected its divine power into its voice, so even if there was a restriction placed in the place where Wuhan was in seclusion, it could still hear its voice. It was just that the old woman refused to come out, so it seemed that she was injured. Hee. Could it be that he was agitated by its voice? If that was the case, it definitely wouldn't feel guilty. It hated that woman. Thinking of this, Song's attitude became even more anxious. Fog Ice. Fog Ice. You ugly freak, get the hell out here. Don't let this lord stay too long, or you'll regret it. Song roared without restraint. His words made the people of the God Lord's estate, who had been in a daze, even more dazed. Ugly? Hearing this, Lung Ruoxue and the others were speechless. Uncle Long and Aojie's mouth twitched. Although they didn't like Wu Ling, they had to admit that she was a rare beauty. However, this beauty had become an ugly monster in Song's mouth. They really didn't know what kind of beauty was considered a beauty in Song's eyes. Moreover, there probably weren't many women who could stand being called ugly, right? Although they thought this way, Fog still did not come out to see the blue. Moreover, it wasn't that she didn't want to come out, but she couldn't. Wuxia was already poisoned, and the poison had not been completely cleared. Moreover, Song's roar just now had made her injuries worse. So, at this moment, she was suffering from pain. It was as if there were insects constantly drilling into her body, and her heart was in so much pain that it was unbearable. Chapter 2050, Wanton Destruction 2. At this moment, her face was extremely pale, and Song's provocative voice continued to reach her ears from the restrictions she had set up. This fact made Wu Xiao extremely angry. Sitting on the futon in her exclusive secret room, Wu Xian was trying to control her blood that was going crazy. Damn madman, can't you just stop? Although she didn't see the person, she knew who this familiar voice was without even going out. More importantly, there weren't many people in the entire divine world who dared to speak to her in such a manner. Song was definitely one of them, and he was the strongest among this small group of people. Even she was afraid of him. Thus, although she was furious, she didn't go out to see Song immediately. Instead, she tried her best to calm her raging blood. Who knew that at this moment, another loud roar was transmitted into Wu Yan's ears. Immediately, her heart trembled violently. With a pft, a mouthful of bright red blood spurted out of her mouth and splattered on the snow-white ground not far from her. It was like a red plum blooming on the snow, bright red and dazzling. Wu Lian endured the pain in her body, and wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth. She knew that this time, her injuries had been added to her injuries, and this was all because of that lunatic Song. However, she would not go crazy like that lunatic. At this moment, she knew that the most important thing for her was to heal. After stuffing a few healing pills into her mouth, she continued to concentrate on absorbing the spiritual energy in the secret room. Unfortunately, Song wouldn't let her do as she wished. Roars that were louder than the previous one reverberated in Wuxiao's ears. Even though she had already shut off her six senses, Song's demonic voice still rang in her ears. Fog ice! Ugly monster! Hurry up and get out here! Forcefully suppressing the anger in her heart, Wu Yan had an impulse to go out and meet that madman for a moment. However, her rationality still made her calm down. Therefore, after thinking for a while, she immediately sat as steady as Mount Tai. Song, who had been causing a ruckus in the God Lord's manor, saw that fog ripple refused to come out. The anger in its heart shot up to its head. Its body, which was originally covered in black fog, now showed an angry fiery red. This time, it was really angry and its patience was exhausted. Fog ice! Ugly monster! I'll give you one last chance. If you don't come out in 5 minutes, don't blame me for being impolite. Song was so angry that he stomped his feet, his roars getting louder and louder. Many people in the Divine Lord's estate couldn't withstand Song's pressure and fainted. Xian Yi and the other two hierarch experts' faces also turned pale. They were not feeling well either. Song's strength was so powerful that it made their hearts tremble. They had never dreamed that there would be such a powerful expert in the divine world. Their reverent god rank seemed so fragile in front of this Totoro that they couldn't even withstand a single blow. This fact was a huge blow to Huang Wei and Xia Yi. In comparison, Xianyi was still in a better state. After all, he had already found out the identity of this Totoro through Uncle Long. AI. That person. Wu Chen also didn't dare to provoke him. Xianyi knew very well that the Totoro in front of him was undoubtedly the one who the fog in the entire divine world feared the most. However, although the Totoro was powerful, it did not care about the matters of the divine world, big or small, nor did it care who was the divine master. Otherwise, the divine world would not have been in turmoil in the past. However, now that the Totoro had set its eyes on that little girl, the divine world was probably going to change. Just as Xianyi was thinking, he heard the voice of the falling time meter. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's time. After saying that, Azure's figure immediately expanded. In an instant, Song's huge body took up more than half of the God Lord's estate. Compared to its huge body, everyone in the God Lord's estate was even smaller. Just as everyone's eyes were wide open, looking at Song in shock, suddenly, several sharp energy waves exploded from Song's body, followed by a bang. Then, everyone watched helplessly as the sturdy, tall, and magnificent golden building of the Divine Master's estate collapsed like it was made of paper. Horrifying. It was absolutely horrifying. What kind of strength was this? It was able to collapse the God Lord's estate, which had an extremely strong defensive formation. When did such a bull beast appear in the immortal realm? At this time, although countless thoughts floated through everyone's mind, their minds were even more at a loss. As soon as the main building of the God's Manor collapsed, the other subsidiary buildings also had a chain reaction, like dominoes. They were all broken into pieces one after another. The people of the God's Manor who had been recuperating in their rooms also hurriedly escaped from their rooms with their injuries. Of course, there were also those who were too slow to escape, and those who did not escape were definitely dead. However, Azure didn't care about how many people he had accidentally killed. To him, most people were ants that weren't worth paying attention to. Therefore, the deaths of those people had nothing to do with him. If he wanted to blame someone, he could only blame that ignorant old woman, Fog Ice. Its patience was limited, and Wu Chen had already provoked it. At this moment, it felt that it was no longer as simple as just trying to hold Wu Ling back. However, it would not kill Wu Ling either. On the one hand, the two of them were equal in strength, and it was difficult to determine the winner. On the other hand, it was the spirit of the God-protecting tower, and had the responsibility to protect the divine world. Therefore, it could not kill Wu Ling personally, even if Wu Ling was a stolen divine master. However, he could still teach Wu Xian a lesson. One had to know that Wuxia might have been injured. This was a rare opportunity. Song did not have any noble sentiment of not taking advantage of others when they were in danger. What it pursued was take advantage of your illness and take your life. So, don't blame it for being despicable. With that in mind, Song destroyed the magnificent god's manor with even more fearlessness. A large portion of the people in the god's manor had been scared silly by Song's domineering attitude. Their legs were trembling, and they did not dare to stop the fierce Totoro from destroying the god's manor. Seeing that Azure had only flicked its fur a few times and sneezed a few times, the gorgeous Divine Lord's estate had been reduced to ruins. Other than being dumbfounded, there was no other reaction. Fortunately, Azure didn't take it out on them. Otherwise, they would have been so scared that their legs would have gone soft. In fact, many people wanted to escape from Song's territory, but those who had this thought didn't even have the strength to lift their legs. So they could only stand there stupidly with their heads lowered, trying to lower their presence. Your Excellency Xianyi, you have to think of a way. If this continues, the God Lord's estate will become the laughing stock of the entire God world. Seeing this, Huang Wei and Xia Yi sent a message to Xianyi at the same time. Xianyi was the strongest among the three of them. Therefore, whenever there was a major problem that could not be solved, the other two would first ask for his opinion. This time was no exception. Chapter 2051. Wanton Destruction 3. Unless the God Lord appears, there's no other way. Xianyi shook his head helplessly. At this moment, almost all the buildings within 100 miles of the Divine Lord's estate had collapsed. The only thing that was intact was probably the surrounding walls of the Divine Lord's estate. However, he believed that these walls were probably a cover for the Divine Lord's estate on purpose. After all, with the wall's obstruction, even if outsiders heard the explosion, they would not know what had happened to the Divine Lord's estate. In this way, the Divine Lord's estate could still retain some of its face. After all, rumors stopped at the wise. However, he was very sure that if the Divine Master didn't show up, the wall would be destroyed. Xianyi didn't know what he was feeling at the moment. He was excited, but at the same time, he was also a little sad. After all, he had lived in the Divine Master's estate for a long time, and had a deep feeling about this place. Now that he saw that this place had become a ruin, his heart was filled with mixed feelings. In contrast to Xianyi's complicated thoughts, Lung Ruoxue and the rest were extremely depressed. None of them had thought that Song's temper would be so big, and that his destructive power would be so strong. The moment it exploded, the buildings in the Divine Master's residence became the sacrificial objects of the fog. Even the secret underground chambers were not spared. Through the light screen, Lung Ruoxue and the rest could see that many secret chambers had been destroyed and the real and fake clones inside were all exposed. In particular, Wu Yan's avatar was shaking its huge flower in anger. The petals on its body trembled violently to show its anger. However, the avatar did not dare to act rashly, and remained in the blood pool that had been destroyed long ago. When Lung Ruoxue saw the petals of the clone turn from fiery red to dark red, and finally to black red, she knew that the clone must be feeling extremely aggrieved. However, what made it even more aggrieved was yet to come. At the thought of this, Lung Ruoxue couldn't help but laugh to herself. She was in a good mood. Seeing this, Aojie could not help but ask, "Little girl, the God Lord's estate has been reduced to ruins. Aren't you worried at all? This would be very disadvantageous for them to obtain the petals of the rime ice. What's the use of worrying? It's already been destroyed." Lung Ruoxue replied calmly. In reality, how could she not be worried? The God Lord's estate was now a barren wasteland, and the hiding place of Fog Phoenix's main body could not be preserved. Without the guidance and obstruction of the surrounding buildings, they would naturally have to spend a lot of effort to find the coordinates of the secret room again. This would undoubtedly waste more of their time, but since things had come to this, they could only accept it. More importantly, as long as Song Nung could help them hinder Fog Phoenix, it did not matter if they spent more time. At the same time, she couldn't help but sigh in her heart. As expected of a formation that could hide one's body, it was actually not destroyed by Azure. From this, it could be seen that the fog ice had spent a lot of effort to protect the main body, but this was only right. Hearing Lung Ruoxia's words, Aojia could not help but sigh heavily. Sister, don't worry. I know the coordinates of that secret room very well. I won't be unable to find it. Glancing at the dejected Aojia, Qingju, who knew what Lung Ruoxia was thinking, said with a smile. Really? Little green vessel, you're amazing. Hearing this, Aojia was happy. He was no longer depressed over the fact that the Divine Master's residence had become a ruin. After his joy, he could not help but gloat. This time, Wuxia was going to have a headache. Wouldn't it have been fine if she had come out earlier? And you're wasting our time. If she could come out, she wouldn't be closing her eyes like this. Lung Ruoxia said after some thought. Right now, she could more or less guess that Fog Phoenix might have met with some trouble. And this trouble was nothing more than being injured. Otherwise, Fog Phoenix would have jumped out long ago. Even so, she didn't dare to go to the destroyed secret room where Fog Ripple's main body was hidden. Therefore, she and the others could only wait patiently. You're saying that she might be injured? Uncle Long made a guess after hearing Lung Ruoxia's words. Yes. Lung Ruoxia nodded her head. This possibility was very high. Then what are we waiting for? Let's quickly find her original body. We can leave after we get the petals. Aojia said anxiously after hearing Uncle Long's words. Do you think that Raimeis is an idiot? The fact that she didn't appear means that she's very confident in her original body. If we rashly go and take the petals from her original body, do you think she'll still not come out? Uncle Long looked at Aojia as if he was an idiot. He believed that the reason why Fog was not coming out despite Song's threat was because she thought that Song would not do anything to her. Otherwise, she would not be so calm. Yes. In Uncle Long's eyes, Wu Xian's performance was absolutely calm and composed. At the same time, Uncle Long also had a trace of admiration for Wu Xian. Although that woman was not popular in some aspects, her temperament was worth learning from. In fact, Wu Yan was not as calm as Uncle Long had said. At this moment, she was so angry that she was about to explode because the secret room she had stayed in had been destroyed by Tsang. Except for a transparent barrier that was still dutifully acting as a barrier between her and the outside world, she could be considered to have appeared in front of everyone without any concealment. However, with the existence of the barrier, it was impossible for outsiders to see her. However, everything outside was clear to her. She didn't even need to use her divine sense to see everything outside. Looking at the God Lord's manor that she had carefully designed and decorated, now in ruins, the anger in Ripple's heart doubled. There was a taste of blood in her throat, and then Poochie. With a few sounds, she spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. The bright red blood splattered on the ground. Even the restriction was not spared. Looking at the blood dripping from the restriction, forming a small stream and dripping down, Fog Ripple felt pained. Blood. This was her most precious blood. Furthermore, it was her most precious blood from her heart. Although there were only a few drops, it would have taken her at least several hundred years to accumulate these few drops. But now it was all destroyed in an instant. She hated it so much. At this time, she wished she could eat Song's flesh and drink Song's blood. Unfortunately, although she had been drooling over Song for a long time, she was unable to succeed because that guy could only look and not eat. Who asked it to be an artifact spirit? As an artifact spirit, it was naturally impossible for it to be as hot-blooded as humans or beasts. As long as she thought of this, she felt that it was a pity. One had to know that Azure was also born from chaos. However, that fellow was not a human with flesh and blood. How could she not feel regretful? Just as Mist Ripple was sighing, her heart suddenly skipped a beat. An ominous premonition welled up in her heart. Immediately after, her pupils constricted and the anger in her heart exploded like a storm. That damned Song. He actually went to her clone. That pair of annoying claws that made people want to chop off when they saw it actually seemed to be unintentionally stroking her avatar. Suddenly, Wu Ling felt the hair on her body stand up and a chill ran down her back. How detestable. What was this guy trying to do? Wu Xiao's nervous heart was in her throat, especially when she saw Song's sharp claws, which were emitting a frighteningly cold light, drawing on her huge flower petals. She was so scared that she broke out in cold sweat. If it was someone else, she might not be afraid. After all, her clone could not be destroyed so easily. But this guy in front of him was Song. That guy had always done whatever he wanted. He had never put her, the divine master, in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of her. More importantly, if that guy wanted to destroy her clone, it would be as easy as turning over his hand. Seeing this scene, no matter how much Wuxian tried to comfort herself, she couldn't calm down. She had already destroyed one of her clones, and she could not afford to destroy this one as well. Otherwise, her strength would be greatly reduced. With this thought in mind, she flashed out of the restriction. At the same time, Azure's sharp claws were about to grab the huge flower. It really didn't like this flower. Since Rhyme Ripple didn't want to come out, it could only vent its anger on this broken flower. It believed that destroying this flower would definitely make Rhyme feel heartache. Hee. Laughing a few times in his heart, Song didn't hesitate to grab the flower path. However, before he could do anything, he felt a terrifying aura appear beside him. Stop. Following a loud shout, a red figure appeared behind Azure. Azure turned around and smiled at the red figure. Ugly freak. You're finally willing to come out. Blue laughed very happily and very wretchedly. Seeing that he was about to complete his task, Blue's mood was very good. However, Wu Xiao's mood was the exact opposite. Seeing Song's annoying smile, Wu Xiao, who was holding back a wave of anger in her heart, almost vomited blood again. Song actually went to Wu Xiao and said, "Ugly monster. I haven't seen you for a long time. Why do you look more haggard? Ayaya. You're really too pitiful. Are you too busy every day and you can't take it? It's okay, you can tell me. I'm happy to share your burden. What are you doing here?" The furious Wu Xiao ignored Song's seemingly concerned words and asked directly, "I miss you, so I'm here to catch up with you, okay?" Song said with a face full of anticipation. His dark and bright eyes were moist like shining black diamonds as he stared unblinkingly at Wu Jing. Chapter 2052, Fluff vs. Petals 1. You miss me? Wu Yan's beautiful eyes narrowed as she asked in disbelief. Her heart was constantly thinking about this guy's intentions. One must know that she knew better than anyone that this guy was definitely the kind of person who wouldn't come to the temple for no reason. If there wasn't something particularly important, he wouldn't even bother to appear in front of her. Therefore, she knew in her heart that this madman definitely didn't come here for good. She still remembered that the last time Song had appeared in front of her was 1,000 years ago. At that time it was for one of its subordinates. Because that subordinate had offended it, Song had come to ask her for it. The time before that, Azure had appeared to ask her for a few of her leaves. Even before that, Azure had also come to her for various reasons, and every time, it would make her heart ache. However, she couldn't do anything to this guy. Not only was this fellow extremely thick-skinned, but it was also extremely willful and stubborn. No matter what you said, as long as it had made up its mind, it would definitely do it. Otherwise, it would continue to make a fuss like before, until you were upset and had no choice but to agree to its request. But this time, because she didn't appear in time, this destructive madman had destroyed her divine lord's estate. How could she not be furious? But even though she was angry, she was at her wit's end with this scoundrel. She might not be able to beat him if she hit him. And if she scolded him, he would go in one ear and out the other. She didn't care at all, so she really didn't know what kind of attitude she should use to face Song, even though she hated him to the core. If she could, she really wanted to kill this annoying Totoro in front of her. Because of it, she disliked all Totoros in the divine realm. She knew that she was taking her anger out on them, but she didn't dare to do anything to the Totoro clan. If Azure found out, she wouldn't be able to live in peace. For tens of millions of years, the person she feared the most was definitely not you, but the annoying Totoro in front of her. When he went crazy, this guy wouldn't give anyone face. With this kind of thinking, she generally adopted an attitude of tolerating if she could. If she couldn't bear it, she had to endure it. At most, she would find some unlucky people to vent her anger on after the matter. Just thinking of this, Fog Eyes felt aggrieved, especially when she saw Song's face that deserved a beating. The anger in her heart grew uncontrollably and spread to her whole body like a spark of fire. However, Song didn't care whether this old woman was angry or not. Moreover, it wasn't clear that in just a short time, Fog Ice's mind had already turned 1,000 times. Even if it knew, it would still have this attitude. Grinning, Song said to Ripple mysteriously, "Why won't I miss you? After all, we've been friends for so many years, right? However, you don't seem to miss me at all. Sigh. Oh, be sad like this." As he spoke, Song's expression became more and more dazzling. Fortunately, everyone present knew that Song wasn't a pitiful person. Otherwise, those who didn't know the truth would definitely think that Song was being bullied. But now no one would think so. In fact, in their hearts, Song had already risen to the level of a demon, causing their hearts to be in chaos. When Wu Jing heard this, she was so angry that her whole body trembled. It would be strange if this damn guy missed her. Although they didn't see each other often, she knew Song too well. In her opinion, Song was definitely the greatest demon in the world, even more detestable than the one in the Nine Nether prison. After all, that person was far away and it wasn't easy to meet him. However, Song could appear in front of her at any time, and every time he appeared, it was definitely not for good. It wasn't to say that she would be in a mess, but it was almost there. "Little Lian, aren't you too excited? Calm down. Be careful of a heart attack." Seeing Wu Xian's reaction, the expression on Song's face immediately turned to worry, and his dark eyes became more moist, as if he was worried to the point of crying at any time. "You're the one who should be careful. You're the one with heart disease." Hearing Song's words, Fog Ripple gritted her teeth in anger. Her beautiful pale face flushed red from her anger, but her complexion looked much better than before. "Little Liani, I know that women don't mean what they say, so don't quibble. If you're sick, you must be treated. You'll have to keep it obediently." Wu Ling's words made Song completely unconcerned, and he only said what he wanted to say. Moreover, his sympathetic eyes followed Wu Ling closely, causing the anger in Wu Lian's heart to explode. Wu Xian took a few deep breaths and kept telling himself to stay calm, and not to be fooled by this guy. Otherwise, wouldn't he get what he wanted? "What do you want?" Wu Chun, who had calmed down a little, suppressed his anger and asked coldly. Now, she just wanted to get rid of this guy as soon as possible. She didn't want to continue chatting with it because she knew very well that she couldn't get a clear idea of what was going on with this guy. So, she just wanted to get rid of this god of plague as soon as possible. Unfortunately, how could the god of plagues be so easily sent away? Could he still be the god of plague in her heart? "I said, I wanted to catch up with you." Song, who was very clear about Fog's thoughts, said with a faint smile. Looking at his expression, it was as if he had really come to visit an old friend. However, this old friend did not seem to welcome him. Xianyi, who was standing not far away, saw this scene and had a new understanding of Song's shamelessness. This guy was really too shameless. He clearly had an unspeakable purpose, but he kept saying that he wanted to reminisce about the past. Not to mention that Wu Xiao wouldn't believe him. Even he wouldn't believe him. Not to mention, he knew Song's purpose. At this moment, Lung Ruoxue and the others who were watching the scene through the light screen had a new understanding of Song. They secretly decided that no matter who they offended in the future, they would never offend this fellow. Otherwise, it would definitely anger them to death. Now that they saw that Wu Xian was so angry that her whole body was trembling, but she had no way to vent her anger, their hearts were suddenly filled with deep sympathy for her. Fortunately, Song was on their side. Lung Ruoxue and the rest could not help but rejoice. "Do you think him a 3-year-old child?" At this time, after hearing Song's words, she forced herself to calm down. At this moment, the coldness that was emitted from her body from time to time made the people in the God Lord's estate feel a cold current that they had never felt before. Immediately, everyone shivered and their minds recovered. Hearing this, Azure smiled happily. "Aren't you just a child in my eyes? Enough of this nonsense, tell me why you're here." Miss gritted her teeth. She really didn't want to continue talking nonsense with Azure, so she asked again. "I said, Song was about to say that he was here to reminisce about the old days when he was rudely interrupted by Fog. If you continue to say that, I won't have the time to talk to you. Wu Li's sharp eyes kept looking at Song, and her tone was full of warning. Chapter 2053. Fluff vs. Petals 2. Little Lian. You're getting more and more impatient. AI. Is it because no one loves me when I'm old? Azure continued to change the topic, and his words had successfully touched the reverse scale of the fog, which was the biggest taboo of the fog. Damn it. You're not cute. You're the unloved one. Song's words made Wu Xiao jump. She couldn't hide the anger in her heart. At this moment, she really wanted to cut this annoying fellow in front of her into 8 pieces. Unfortunately, there was still a trace of rationality left in her heart, but she told her not to do that. So she endured it. Seeing that Fog still maintained a trace of rationality, Song was very disappointed. This woman was really not simple. No wonder he could become the Lord of the Divine Realm. However, it didn't want to see Wu Chen having a good time, so it continued to provoke her without fear of death. What, did I say something wrong? You're not cute to begin with, and no one loves you. I know it's not your fault that you've become an unwanted old woman, so you don't have to blame yourself. You're the Divine Master, so no one would dare to laugh at you. At most, they're just gossiping behind your back. Don't worry. I'm here, I won't let anyone say anything. After all, he was a Divine Master. How could he allow others to gossip at will? Don't worry. As long as I hear any gossip about you, I'll definitely stop it. Azure continued while adding in his heart, it can't hear. Naturally, he could not stop it. You. Song's words caused Wu Xiao's body to be so angry that she was like a fallen leaf in the wind, trembling nonstop. It also successfully made her so angry that she couldn't speak. Seeing Mist Ripple's body tremble even more, Azure's mood improved and he took advantage of the situation to pursue. Little Ripple, don't be agitated. Calm down. You must stay calm. Calm your head. Get out of the Divine Master's estate. I don't want to see you. Mist Ripple couldn't take it anymore and finally asked him to leave. However, how could it be so easy to get rid of Song? Moreover, Song didn't like people asking it to get lost. One must know that it had always used the word get lost on others. Little Lian, you're too unrefined. It's not easy for me to come here, and not only are you not entertaining me, you actually want to send me away? I'm telling you, it's easy to invite a god, but hard to send him away. I won't leave unless you can satisfy my request. Otherwise, I'll just stay here. After hearing Wu Xiao's words, not only did Song not get angry, he even took the initiative to state his purpose. The people of the God Lord's estate once again had a deeper understanding of Song's shamelessness. This guy wasn't invited by them, okay? This Totoro had clearly come uninvited. Now he was even blaming them. Oh no. He was relying on the Divine Master. However, they quite admired this Totoro. After angering the Divine Master half to death, it still had the courage to raise conditions. This was truly the #1 ox beast of the Divine Realm. Could it be that the Totoro clan was about to rise? Many people were guessing in their hearts because they could all see that although the Divine Master was so angry that he was about to vomit blood, he clearly could not do anything to the Totoro. Otherwise, how could the Totoro be alive if it dared to treat the Divine Master like this? But now, the Master God was half dead from anger. But this Totoro didn't even lose a hair. Seeing this, who would not understand that this Totoro was quite special to the Master God? It was to the point where even godlords couldn't bear to kill them. Those who didn't know the truth would naturally think this way. However, Xianyi, who knew the identity of this Totoro, didn't have such thoughts at all. In fact, he knew quite well that it wasn't that the Divine Master didn't want to kill this Totoro, but this guy couldn't be killed. Not only that, but the Master God had to tolerate the Totoro's provocation. Who asked it to have an extraordinary identity? AI. At this moment, he was deeply aware of the importance of status, the importance of having a strong backing. If he wanted to do as he pleased in the immortal realm, he could not do without either. Do you have any requests? After a long time, Wu Chen, who kept consoling herself, finally had a reaction. Hee. My request is very simple. You will definitely be able to satisfy it. Azure laughed. Don't talk nonsense. What request do you have? Wu Yan's patience had reached its limit. She felt that she was somewhat impressed by herself for being able to hold back and not make a move. You will agree to it, right? Song didn't say anything, and instead continued to ask. Hurry up and state your request. Wu Qing almost crushed his teeth from gritting them and furiously roared. First say yes or no. Azure said stubbornly. As long as it's not too much, I'll agree to it, okay? Wu Jing compromised. This guy made her feel very powerless. I'm not going too far, definitely not. Don't worry. Azure hurriedly said, then he bluntly said. Give me one of your petals, but it has to be the one from your body. What did you just say? Upon hearing this, Mist Ripple was so angry that her eyes were spitting fire. Her desire to tear apart Azure's heart grew even stronger. This guy actually dared to ask for the petals on her body? This is not too much. Then what would be considered outrageous? One had to know that every petal on her body had grown after countless years of hard cultivation. They were also the symbol of her soul and strength, and were of utmost importance to her. After all, as long as her body was not destroyed, she would not die. Thus, in her opinion, every petal and leaf of her body represented her life, and could not be damaged. However, this damn guy actually dared to ask her for a petal. Wasn't this just looking for death? Although Azure had asked her for flower leaves in the past, that was only from her clone. So, in order to send it away, she had given him one. But now, it was impossible to get the petals from the main body. Why do you always want me to repeat myself? AI. It seemed that he was really getting old and couldn't understand what she was saying. I said I want a petal from your body. Do you understand now? Azure waved his meaty claws and said helplessly. While he repeated, he didn't forget to deliberately be angry. However, right now, Wu Yan didn't have the mood to be idle. All her attention was now on the matter of her own petals. This time, Fog quickly gave an answer. You know that's impossible. Nothing is impossible in this world. Why don't I use one of my fur to exchange for it? Song thought for a while and said with a pained expression, as if giving away one of his own fur was a painful thing. When he heard this, not only did the people from the God Lord's estate twitch their lips, even Lung Ruoxue and the others were speechless. Lung Ruoxue and the rest were speechless when they heard this. They didn't know what to say. They looked at the thousands of hairs on Song's body, then at the sparkling red petals on the Fog clone. They couldn't find a way to compare the two. Moreover, the characteristics of plants and animals were absolutely different. Every leaf on a plant was of great importance to a plant, especially for plants like heavenly materials and earthly treasures. Even a single whisker on the plant was extremely valuable. However, the fur of an animal, besides defense, was more for keeping warm. Moreover, no one had ever heard of the use of a single fur, but it was different for a plant. Therefore, they didn't need to think to know that Wu Yan would never agree to this. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.